The mist hung heavy over the Black Hills that morning, wreathing the pines in ghostly tendrils as Silas Winters moved silently through the forest. His weathered boots made no sound on the carpet of needles, a skill honed through years of tracking both animals and men. The Winchester rifle in his hands was worn, but immaculate functional, maintained with religious care, reliable. He paused, head tilting slightly. The forest had gone silent, no birdsong, no rustling of squirrels, only the soft whisper of wind through the pines. His instincts, sharpened by 5 years in this wilderness, screamed a warning. 20 paces ahead, he found the reason. She lay half-hidden among fallen leaves, her body arranged with deliberate care, rather than discarded. Her hands were crossed over her chest, almost peaceful, but the dark bruises encircling her throat told another story. She couldn't have been more than 20, with pale blonde hair now matted with dried blood. This wasn't his first such discovery, but something was different. Around her neck hung a small silver pendant, a bird in flight, its wings outstretched toward freedom, and pinned to her tattered dress was a folded piece of paper. With gloved hands, Silas carefully removed it. 2 words written in elegant script: "Remember St. Louis." The message wasn't for the dead woman. It was for him. A cold rage settled in Silas's chest as he pocketed the note. They knew he was here. They knew he was still hunting them. And they were sending a message in the most brutal way possible through the body of another innocent. He searched her clothing for identification but found nothing. Just another nameless victim disposed of when she was no longer useful, or when she learned too much. After completing his grim inspection, Silas wrapped her body in his spare blanket and lifted her with gentle reverence. He carried her deeper into the forest to a small clearing few would ever find. 6 simple stone markers formed a solemn row beneath the whispering pines. The 7th grave took him nearly 2 hours to dig, the physical labor, a familiar ritual that gave his anger purpose direction. When the grave was deep enough, he lowered her gently into the earth. Standing over the fresh mound, Silas placed a handful of blue mountain columbine on the grave. The sleeve of his shirt rode up, revealing a faded tattoo, the eagle and shield of the Union Army, and beneath it, a puckered scar from a rebel's bayonet at Antietam. "They're getting bolder," he said to the silent forest, "leaving you where I would find you, with a message meant to shake me." He knelt beside the grave, fingers tracing the crude wooden cross he'd fashioned. "I swear on Hannah's soul I'm close now, and they know it." With one last look at the grave, Silas straightened, checked his rifle with practiced motions 1, 2, 3 times, always 3, and headed back toward his cabin. His isolation in these mountains had lasted 5 years. Perhaps it was time to change tactics. There was work to be done in Deadwood. 1 week earlier, Rebecca Morgan stood at the small cloudy mirror in her room, fingers working to secure her dark hair into a simple bun. The blue dress she wore had been her mother's, taken in to fit her slimmer frame. It was the only decent clothing she owned, and even this was worn thin at the elbows and frayed at the hem. "You're wearing that?" Franklin's voice made her start. Her older brother lounged in the doorway, eyeing her with a mixture of pity and embarrassment. "It's all I have," Becca answered, simply meeting his eyes in the mirror. Franklin sighed, pushing away from the doorframe. "Won't matter much anyway. Caldwell's men aren't known for their interest in fashion." The casual cruelty of the remark stung, but Becca maintained her composure. At 23, she'd had years to perfect a mask of indifference to her family's barbs. "So it's decided then?" she asked quietly. "You and Father are really going through with this? We don't have a choice, Becca. The Colonel wants his money, and we don't have it." Franklin's voice dropped to a harsh whisper. "You don't understand what he's capable of." "There's always a choice," she said, turning to face him directly. "You could stand up to Father, Tell him selling his daughter is a line even he shouldn't cross. Franklin wouldn't meet her eyes. At 27, he had their father's height and their mother's dark hair, but his face had begun to show the bloat of too much whiskey. Once he'd dreamed of leaving Deadwood, of studying law in St. Louis. Now he was just another failed miner, drowning his disappointments. "The debt is too large," he muttered. "And Colonel Porter isn't a man you cross." "How much?" Becca demanded. "How much am I worth to you and Father?" Franklin's jaw tightened. $50. He at least had the decency to flush with shame. Plus forgiveness of the remaining debt, which is another $100. Becca gave a short, bitter laugh. $150. That's my value, less than a good horse. It's not like that. The Golden Spike is respectable enough. Some of those girls end up marrying miners who strike it rich. And the ones who don't, Becca stepped closer, lowering her voice. The ones who disappear after a few months. What happens to them, Franklin? Her brother's face changed, a flash of genuine fear crossing his features. "Keep your voice down. Don't talk about things you don't understand." "I understand more than you think." Becca's amber eyes narrowed. "I've seen the way some of those girls look when they first arrive at the Golden Spike, and I've noticed how some of them vanish later. No one ever asks questions." "Stop it!" Franklin hissed, gripping her arm. "If Father hears you, he'll what? Sell me to the saloon." She yanked her arm free. "Oh, wait, he's already doing that." The slap came without warning, snapping her head to the side. Franklin looked as shocked by his action as Becca felt his hand still raised as if it belonged to someone else. "I'm sorry," he whispered, reaching toward her reddened cheek. "Becca, I didn't mean—" She stepped back out of his reach. "You're just like him now." Footsteps on the stairs interrupted whatever reply Franklin might have made. Walter Morgan's voice boomed through the thin walls. "Is she ready? Wagons loaded." Becca gathered her small bundle of possessions, her mother's book of poetry carefully wrapped in a shawl, a spare dress, a blue ribbon, and a small knife she'd hidden from her father. The book was her most precious treasure, containing not just poems, but her mother's handwritten notes in the margins. Catherine Morgan had taught her daughter to read in secret, against her husband's wishes. "Knowledge is freedom," she'd whispered to Becca, "and they can never take it from you." The memory of her mother's voice strengthened Becca's resolve. She would not go meekly to whatever fate awaited her at the Golden Spike. She would watch, listen, remember, and when the opportunity came, she would escape. Walter Morgan waited impatiently by the wagon, a tall man gone to seed his once handsome face, now bloated and lined his clothes, stained and rumpled. He'd been a successful farmer back in Missouri before whatever demons drove him to drink took hold. "Finally," he grunted as Becca emerged from the house. "Get in, and try to look less like you're going to a funeral. Caldwell's doing us a favor taking you." "A favor?" Becca couldn't contain her bitterness. "Is that what you call selling your daughter to pay a debt?" Walter's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Mind your tongue, girl. You've been nothing but a burden since the day you were born. Too plain to attract a decent husband, too smart for your own good. At least this way, you'll earn your keep." The words hurt despite the years of similar abuse. Becca climbed into the wagon in silence, her face a careful blank. But inside, in the secret chambers of her heart, where her father couldn't reach, she made a vow. Whatever happened at the Golden Spike, she would survive. She would find out what had really happened to her mother 13 years ago. and someday she would make Walter Morgan regret this day. The Golden Spike stood on the edge of Deadwood's mining district, its freshly painted facade a sharp contrast to the muddy street before it. 2 stories high with ornate woodwork and real glass windows, it spoke of prosperity amid the rough and ready buildings surrounding it. Despite the early hour, a small crowd had gathered on the porch, miners coming off night shifts, gamblers who had played until dawn, curious onlookers drawn by the unusual sight of Walter Morgan's wagon. Victor Caldwell awaited them on the steps, a tall man with oiled hair and a waxed mustache. His clothes were fine Eastern-cut, good fabric, but something in his smile made Becca's skin crawl. "Walter Morgan," Caldwell greeted them, his voice smooth as glass. "And this must be Rebecca." Becca kept her eyes lowered, not out of modesty, but to hide the hatred burning in them. She was using every ounce of her extraordinary memory to record details, faces in the crowd, the layout of the street, potential escape routes. "She's as promised," Walter said gruffly. "Young, healthy, can read and write, though I never saw the use in it myself. Educated, are we?" Caldwell lifted Becca's chin with one finger. His touch was light but proprietary, as if he were already assessing merchandise purchased. "Look at me, girl." She met his gaze defiantly. Caldwell's eyes widened slightly at the fire in hers before his expression shifted to one of calculation. "Spirited," he murmured. "That can be adjusted." From the crowd someone called out, "How much you paying for that one, Vic? Don't look worth more than a bottle of rotgut." Laughter rippled through the onlookers. Becca's cheeks burned, but she kept her head high. "The Morgan girl finally getting what she's good for," another voice jeered. Caldwell ignored them, turning instead to address someone emerging from the saloon. "Colonel, your timing is impeccable." Colonel Harland Porter cut an imposing figure even at 60. Tall and straight-backed, his silver hair and beard immaculately groomed, he wore a black suit that spoke of wealth and taste. Only the Confederate gray vest beneath his jacket hinted at his past allegiance. Unlike Caldwell's obvious lechery, Porter's assessment of Becca was clinical dispassionate, which somehow made it worse. His pale blue eyes, sharp as a hawk's, moved over her as if cataloging every feature. "So this is Walter Morgan's daughter," Porter said, his drawl more pronounced up close. He circled Becca slowly. "Thin, but that can be remedied with proper feeding. Good posture, clear eyes." Becca fought the urge to spit in his face. There was something familiar about Porter's voice, something that tugged at her perfect memory, a half-remembered conversation overheard years ago, her father speaking with a Southern-accented man about shipments and new territories. "She'll do," Porter declared. "Mr. Caldwell, shall we conclude our business?" Caldwell nodded, producing a leather pouch. "Half now as agreed. The remainder when she's properly established." Walter Morgan reached for the pouch, but Porter held it back. "First, the papers." From inside his coat, Porter produced a document. A simple bill of sale transferring guardianship of Rebecca Morgan to Victor Caldwell's establishment until such time as her labor has satisfied the debt. "Bill of sale." Becca finally broke her silence. "I'm not property to be sold," Porter smiled coldly. "My dear, in this world everything and everyone has a price. Your father simply found yours." As Walter reached for the quill movement at his elbow, sent Caldwell's jacket swinging open. A small black notebook tumbled from his inner pocket, landing half-open in the dust. Caldwell cursed and stooped quickly to retrieve it, but not before Becca's perfect memory captured a glimpse of its contents. A list of women's names, figures in dollars and locations. One name leaped out at her, Catherine. Next to it, the notation, St. Louis, 1863. Catherine, her mother's name. The year she disappeared. The world seemed to tilt beneath Becca's feet. Before she could process the implications of what she'd seen, a commotion at the edge of the crowd drew their attention. The onlookers parted as a newcomer approached a tall man with the quiet, dangerous air of a predator moving among prey. Silas Winters stopped a few paces from the steps, his pale eyes taking in the scene with calculating precision. He wore buckskins and carried a rifle, a brace of rabbits, slung over one shoulder. The scar that ran from his temple to his jaw tightened as he frowned. "Selling women now, Morgan." His voice was low, rough with disuse, but it carried in the sudden silence. Walter Morgan flushed. "Mind your business, Winters. I'd say the sale of a person in broad daylight makes it everyone's business." Silas shifted his gaze to Becca, then to Caldwell and Porter. Something like recognition flashed in his eyes when they fell on the colonel. Porter stiffened his hand, drifting subtly toward his waistcoat. "I don't believe we've had the pleasure." "No pleasure in it," Silas replied. He dropped his kill and a sack of furs onto the wooden boards of the porch. "What's the price?" Caldwell looked confused. "For the girl she's already spoken for." "I'm asking anyway." A porter studied Silas, his expression calculating. "The debt is $50, Mr. Winters." Silas Winters. He nudged the furs with his boot. "Prime, beaver, and mink, worth 60 at least, plus whatever these rabbits fetch." Becca stared at this strange man, this unexpected interruption to her fate. His face was weathered by sun and wind, lined at the eyes and mouth. A beard neatly trimmed, despite his otherwise rough appearance, covered the lower half of his face. He was older, perhaps 40, but moved with the fluid grace of a much younger man. But it was his eyes that held her attention. Pale blue, almost silver in the morning light, they held a quiet intensity that missed nothing. Those were not the eyes of a simple mountain man or trapper. They were the eyes of someone who had seen too much, who carried a burden of knowledge that had changed him irrevocably. "Mr. Winters," Porter said carefully, "I don't believe you understand the arrangement. Miss Morgan isn't merely collateral for a debt. She's to be employed at the Golden Spike." "I understand perfectly." Silas's gaze never wavered. "I'm offering to clear the debt. What she does after is her choice." A murmur ran through the crowd. Such an offer was unheard of. "Her choice," Caldwell repeated, bemused. "Women don't get choices, Winters. They get told." Silas stepped closer, his voice dropping so only those on the porch could hear. "I've got a cabin up in the hills. She can stay there till she figures out where she wants to go. I'll sleep in the storehouse." He turned to Becca directly. "If you want to leave, I won't stop you. But don't come back to Deadwood. It's not safe for women alone." Becca's breath caught. The stranger was offering her freedom, not ownership. In his pale eyes, she saw no lust, no greed, only a quiet determination she couldn't fathom. Porter and Caldwell exchanged glances. Walter Morgan looked torn between relief at the debt being settled and suspicion of Winters' motives. "What's your angle, Winters?" Franklin finally asked, voicing what everyone was thinking. Silas didn't answer him, keeping his attention on Becca. "Your choice?" he repeated. For the first time in her life, someone was giving her agency. The sensation was so foreign, it took her a moment to recognize it. "I'll go with Mr. Winters," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. Porter's eyes narrowed. "I'm not sure that's wise, Miss Morgan. Do you know this man? Better a stranger with honest intentions than men whose plans for me are all too clear," Becca replied. "Honest intentions," Caldwell scoffed. "A man living alone in the hills taking in a young woman. There's nothing honest about that." "Says the man who runs a brothel," Silas countered evenly. Caldwell's face darkened. The Golden Spike is a respectable establishment. And then why do so many of your respectable girls end up dead in the woods? The question hung in the air like gun smoke. Porter stepped forward, his hand moving to his waistcoat, where a weapon might be concealed. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Winters. It's not an accusation. It's a question. Silas didn't back down. One that's been bothering me for some time. The tension on the porch stretched taut as a bowstring. Becca looked from Porter's cold anger to Caldwell's calculation to her father's confusion. Whatever was happening here went beyond a simple debt collection. Porter broke the silence with a forced laugh. I believe we've strayed from the matter at hand. Mr. Morgan, if you're satisfied with Mr. Winters's offer, then I see no reason to prolong this unfortunate situation. Walter hesitated, then nodded. The furs cover the debt. With interest, Porter confirmed, though his eyes remained on Silas. Though I do wonder why Mr. Winters is so invested in your daughter's welfare. Silas gathered his rifle. Someone needs to be. The papers were signed, the furs and game accepted as payment. Through it all, Becca stood silent, watching the exchange of her life from one man to another. The difference was, this time she had chosen. As they prepared to leave, Porter caught Silas's arm. We've met before, haven't we, Mr. Winters? Don't believe so, Silas replied, though something in his tone suggested otherwise. I never forget a face. Porter's smile didn't reach his eyes, especially one with such a distinctive scar. Silas pulled his arm free with controlled strength. Lot of scarred men in these parts, Colonel. Porter's fingers tightened briefly on Silas's arm before releasing him. Indeed. Well, safe travels, Mr. Winters. The hills can be dangerous this time of year. All manner of predators about. The threat in the words was unmistakable. Silas merely nodded and guided Becca down the steps and away from the Golden Spike, from her family, from the life that had almost been forced upon her. The crowd parted for them, some faces showing disgust, others curious respect. Walter Morgan made no move to say goodbye to his daughter. Franklin at least raised a hand in awkward farewell conflict, evident in his face. Becca didn't look back. Her mind was racing with what she'd glimpsed in the notebook, Catherine St. Louis, 1863. Could it really be her mother? After all these years, was this the first real clue to what had happened? They rode out of Deadwood in silence, Silas on the bay, gelding with Becca seated behind him. The horse picked its way up a narrow trail, climbing steadily into the Black Hills. The air grew cooler, the pine scent stronger. After the close, smoky confines of Deadwood, Becca felt like she could breathe properly for the first time in years. Why did you do that? She finally asked, her voice nearly lost in the creak of leather and the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves. By my debt. Silas was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Seen too many girls sold like that, he finally said, voice tight. Seen what becomes of them after. The women in the woods, Becca guessed. You found them. He nodded once, his jaw tightening. How many? 7 now. The simple answer chilled her. Not too many or several, a precise count. 7 women discarded like trash. In the notebook, she said suddenly. The one Caldwell dropped, I saw a name. Catherine St. Louis, 1863. She felt Silas tense slightly. My mother's name was Catherine. She disappeared in St. Louis in 1863. Silas reined the horse to a stop, turning slightly in the saddle to study her face. You saw that in the split second before he picked it up. Yes, I remember everything I see. Word for word, image for image. It's why my father thought I was unnatural. Nothing unnatural about a sharp mind, Silas said, urging the horse forward again. Might be useful, in fact. For what? Finding the truth. They continued in silence, the trail growing steeper and narrower. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the pines, creating a dappled pattern across the forest floor. Occasionally, Silas would point out landmarks, a lightning-struck tree, an unusual rock formation, a stream crossing. In case you need to find your way, he explained, it dawned on Becca that he was showing her escape routes, ways back to civilization, if she needed to flee from him. The realization was both reassuring and puzzling. What manner of man rescued a woman from being sold only to ensure she could escape him if necessary? "Did you know my mother?" she asked, unable to contain the question any longer. Silas's shoulders tensed, then relaxed with a deep exhale. "Maybe. The name sounds familiar, but it was a long time ago." "You're not just a trapper, are you?" A humorless chuckle escaped him. "Not just a trapper, no." Before she could press further, the trees opened onto a small plateau nestled among the pines. A cabin stood in a natural clearing, its sturdy log walls weathered to a silvery gray. A lean-to storehouse stood off to one side, and beyond it, a small corral. A creek bubbled nearby, its water clear and cold. The cabin itself was half-finished. The main structure was complete, but one wall remained partially open, covered with canvas to keep out the weather. A stone chimney rose from the roof, wisps of old smoke stains marking its top. Silas dismounted, then offered a hand to help Becca down. She hesitated before accepting it, noting the calluses that roughened his palm, the careful way he released her the moment her feet touched ground. "It's not much," he said, gesturing to the cabin. "Been working on it when I can." Becca took in the rustic dwelling, the surrounding forest, the distant view of valleys beyond. After the chaos and uncertainty of the morning, the peaceful isolation was almost overwhelming. "Thank you," she said simply, "for what you did back there." Silas looked uncomfortable with her gratitude. "No need for thanks. Just did what needed doing." He led the horse to the corral, removing saddle and bridle with practiced efficiency. Becca stood awkwardly, her small bundle of possessions clutched to her chest, unsure of what to do next. "You can go in," Silas called over. "Door's not locked." The cabin's interior was sparse but orderly. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, cooking pots hanging from an iron arm that swung over the hearth. A rough-hewn table with 2 chairs stood in the center. Against the far wall, a narrow bed was covered with a patchwork quilt, clearly handmade. A trunk sat at its foot. Shelves lined another wall holding an unexpected treasure books. Not many, perhaps a dozen, but more than Becca had seen outside the preacher's house. Beside them sat a kerosene lamp, a few dishes, and a coffee pot. The half-finished wall let in slanted sunlight through the canvas, illuminating motes of dust in the air. The cabin smelled of wood smoke, pine, and something else, a faint, pleasant aroma of dried herbs hanging in small bundles from the rafters. Silas appeared in the doorway, carrying a bucket of water from the creek. He set it near the fireplace, then straightened, looking around as if seeing the cabin through her eyes. "Bed's yours," he said. "I'll sleep in the storehouse." "Thank you, but I couldn't take your—" Wasn't a negotiation. His tone was firm, but not unkind. "Nights get cold up here. Storehouse keeps the wind out, but it's no place for a woman." Becca bristled slightly. "I'm not fragile, Mr. Winters." A ghost of something, perhaps amusement, flickered across his face. "Never said you were, but you've had a hard day. Bed's yours." He moved efficiently around the small space, lighting the lamp as the daylight faded, building a small fire in the hearth. His movements were economical, practiced like a man accustomed to doing for himself. I should help, Becca said, setting down her bundle. If I'm to stay here, I should earn my keep. Silas paused, considering her. Fair enough. Can you cook? Yes. He nodded toward a shelf. Got some rabbit from yesterday. Potatoes in the bin. Make yourself at home. With that, he stepped outside, leaving Becca alone in the cabin. She stood still for a moment, absorbing the sudden change in her circumstances. This morning she had awoken in her father's house, destined for the golden spike. Now she was miles from Deadwood, in a stranger's cabin preparing his dinner. But she wasn't serving a saloon full of grabbing hands and leering faces. She wasn't being broken in by Victor Caldwell. She was cooking a simple meal in a quiet place with a roof over her head and no debt hanging over her. More importantly, she had seen a clue, the first real lead to what might have happened to her mother 13 years ago. And somehow she sensed that Silas Winters might be the key to understanding it all. The next few days established a routine. Each morning, Silas would rise before dawn, check his rifle always 3 times, and disappear into the forest to hunt or check traps. Becca would wake to find coffee already brewing on the hearth and sometimes Johnny cakes warming at the edge of the fire. They worked together to prepare the cabin for winter, stacking firewood, sealing gaps in the walls, smoking meat, gathering wild berries and nuts from the forest. Silas taught her to set simple snares for rabbits, to identify edible plants, to navigate using the sun and stars. He was a patient teacher, never condescending, treating her intelligence as a given rather than a surprise. For Becca, who had been told her entire life that her sharp mind was a liability rather than an asset, this simple respect was more valuable than the shelter he provided. On the 3rd day, as they worked to complete the half-finished wall, Silas surprised her with a question. "This memory of yours," he began, carefully fitting a log into place. "How does it work?" Becca paused, weighing how much to tell him. Few people had ever shown interest in her ability without subsequently treating her as a curiosity, or worse. "It's like everything I see gets painted into my mind," she said finally. "Words on a page, faces, scenes, they stay there perfect and complete. I can recall them whenever I need to." "Useful skill," Silas observed. "Not according to my father. He said it was unnatural for a woman to remember so much." She handed him another log. "He burned the scraps of Bible pages my mother used to teach me reading." Silas's hands stilled. "Your mother taught you in secret?" "Yes," she said. Knowledge was freedom. Becca's voice softened with the memory. "After she disappeared, I kept teaching myself, hiding books under my mattress." "And the notebook you saw at the Golden Spike, you're sure it said Catherine St. Louis, 1863? "Positive. There were other names too, Elizabeth, Sarah, Mary, each with a price and location." Silas was silent for a long moment, his face giving nothing away as he resumed his work on the wall. Then, almost casually, "I knew a Catherine once, in St. Louis." Becca's heart leaped. "When, 13 years ago, I was a policeman then." He looked up, meeting her eyes directly. "She came to the station, said she had information about missing women. Girls disappearing from certain establishments, never to be seen again." "What happened to her?" Becca's voice was barely above a whisper. "Don't know. She was supposed to return the next day with evidence. Never did." Silas's expression darkened. "Week later, I was taken off the case. Department said there wasn't enough evidence to pursue it." "You think it was my mother?" Becca pressed. "Can't say for certain, but the timing fits." The implications hung between them like storm clouds. If her mother had discovered something about missing women, perhaps the same trafficking operation that Silas was investigating now, it would explain her sudden disappearance. and her father's hasty move to Dakota Territory afterward. "My father," she said slowly, "you think he was involved somehow?" Silas's gaze was measuring. "What do you think?" Becca closed her eyes, forcing herself to sift through memories she'd long suppressed. The night before, her mother vanished, raised voices, her father's angry shouts, her mother's tearful pleas. Words she hadn't understood then. Blood money. Those poor girls. I'll go to the police. "I think he knew something," she admitted, opening her eyes. "I think he was involved with whatever my mother discovered. And when she threatened to expose it, she became a liability. Like the women I've found in the hills," Silas said quietly. The implication hung in the air between them. Becca felt sick at the possibility that her own father might have been complicit in her mother's death. Yet a part of her had always suspected, it had always felt the wrongness of his explanation, his lack of grief, the sudden move to Dakota Territory. "I need to know the truth," she said finally. "Even if it's terrible." Silas nodded understanding in his pale eyes. Truth's often terrible, but lies are worse. They fester. That evening, as they sat by the fire after a simple supper, Becca found the courage to ask the question that had been nagging at her since their conversation. "Who are you, really, Silas Winters? Why are you tracking these missing women?" Silas stared into the fire, the flames reflecting in his pale eyes. For a moment, she thought he might not answer. Then he reached for his shirt pocket and withdrew a folded piece of paper, the note he'd found on the dead woman in the woods. "Remember St. Louis," he read aloud before tucking it away again. "It's a message, not for her, for me." From who? Porter, most likely, or someone working for him. Silas's face hardened. 5 years ago, I was a detective with the St. Louis police. Started noticing a pattern. Young women disappearing from certain establishments. Working girls mostly, but some respectable women too. No bodies turning up. No ransom demands. Just gone. Becca listened intently, hardly daring to breathe lest she interrupt the flow of his story. "I was getting close. Had names, dates, suspected a major trafficking operation. Then one night I came home late from following a lead." His voice roughened. "House was in flames. Hannah and Lily inside. Door had been barricaded from the outside." "Hannah and Lily?" Becca asked softly. "My wife and daughter." The words were simple but laden with grief. "Warning to me. Back off or else." "Did you know who did it?" "Had suspicions. No proof. Department shut down my investigation the next day. Said I was too personally involved seeing connections that weren't there." His laugh was bitter. "Captain took me off active duty, put me on a desk. When I kept digging anyway, they forced me out." "So you came here," Becca guessed, "to continue your investigation. Followed the trail. These operations move change names, but the men behind them stay the same. Took me 2 years to trace it to Deadwood. Another year to confirm Caldwell's involvement." His eyes hardened. "But he's just a middleman. The real power is higher up." "Colonel Porter," Becca said with certainty. Silas's gaze sharpened. "What makes you so sure? The way he carried himself at the Golden Spike. The deference Caldwell showed him. And—" she hesitated. "Something my father said the night before they tried to sell me. About owing a debt to the colonel." He seemed terrified. The conversation lapsed into silence, both of them lost in thought. Finally, Silas rose, checking the cabin door and shutters with habitual care before preparing to retire to the storehouse. "Silas," Becca called as he reached the door. "The notebook. We need to get it back, don't we? For proof." He paused, hand on the latch. "Been trying for months. Caldwell keeps it close. I could help. With my memory, if I could see more pages. No. His voice was firm. Too dangerous. Porter already suspects who I am. If he connects us... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The image of Hannah and Lily trapped in a burning house hung unspoken between them. We'll find another way, he promised. Get some rest. After he left, Becca sat by the dying fire, her thoughts churning. Despite Silas's warning, she knew she couldn't simply hide in the hills, while the truth about her mother and possibly many other women remained buried. Her perfect memory was a tool, perhaps even a weapon. She just needed to figure out how to use it. On the 5th day, Becca discovered the letters. Silas had gone hunting at dawn, expecting to be gone until dusk. A storm was brewing, the first serious weather since Becca's arrival, and he wanted to secure extra meat before the snow made hunting difficult. Left alone, Becca decided to thoroughly clean the cabin. She swept the floor, washed the few dishes, beat the dust from the patchwork quilt. When she moved Silas's trunk to sweep beneath it, she noticed it wasn't fully latched. She hesitated, respecting his privacy, but curiosity, the same sharp-eyed attention to detail that had allowed her to glimpse Caldwell's notebook, made her pause. If Silas was investigating the disappearances from the Golden Spike, perhaps the trunk contained information that could help make sense of her mother's disappearance as well. The trunk opened silently on well-oiled hinges. Inside neatly folded clothes lay atop a flat wooden box. Becca lifted the box carefully, setting it on the table. No lock secured it, only a simple wooden latch. Inside, she found a stack of letters, all addressed in the same careful hand, "My dearest Hannah." None were sealed or stamped. They had never been sent. Becca's conscience pricked at her. This was clearly private, a glimpse into Silas's grief that she had no right to witness. She should close the box, return it to the trunk, pretend she'd never seen it. But as she moved to do just that, her eyes caught phrases on the topmost letter, and her perfect memory captured them instantly. The cabin is coming along slowly. I've finished the roof and 2 walls. You would like the view from the front porch. The valley opens up below, and on clear days you can see all the way to the river. Almost against her will, she found herself reading more. Lily would be 7 now. I wonder if she'd still want to be a doctor. Remember how she used to bandage her dolls? Found another one today. Young, maybe 20. No identification. I buried her with the others. That makes 5. How many more before I find who's responsible? I dream of you both every night. In the dreams, I'm always running toward our house, but no matter how fast I go, the flames are faster. Shame washed over her. These weren't just letters. They were a private ritual of grief, a way for Silas to keep his family close, in the only way left to him. What right did she have to intrude on such intimate pain? Her hands trembled as she carefully replaced the letters in their box. As she was closing the trunk, a sound at the door made her whirl around, heart in her throat. Silas stood in the doorway, his hunting rifle in one hand, a string of rabbits in the other. His eyes moved from her guilty face to the trunk and back again, his expression darkening. "Found what you were looking for." His voice was quiet, dangerous. "I was cleaning," Becca began, then stopped. Lies wouldn't serve either of them. "I moved the trunk, and it wasn't latched. I saw the box with the letters." "And you read them?" It wasn't a question, but she nodded anyway. "I'm sorry. It was wrong of me." The silence stretched between them, taut with unspoken accusations. Becca braced herself for anger for being ordered to leave. Instead, Silas's shoulders sagged. He set the rifle against the wall, hung the rabbits from a hook by the door. "Doesn't matter," he said finally. "They're just words on paper. Won't bring them back." The resignation in his voice was somehow worse than anger would have been. Becca stepped forward impulsively. "It's not just words," she said. "It's memory. It's keeping them alive the only way you can." Silas looked at her sharply, as if seeing something in her he hadn't noticed before. "You understand that I've spent 13 years trying to remember every detail about my mother. The sound of her voice, the way she smelled like lavender and soap, how she would hum when she thought no one was listening." Becca's voice caught. "Some days, I'm afraid I'll forget something important, and then it will be like losing her all over again." Something shifted in Silas's expression, a softening around the eyes, a momentary vulnerability. "Hannah used to sing to Lily at night, old folk songs, lullabies." He looked away as if the memory was too painful to share directly. "Sometimes up here when the wind's right, I think I can still hear it." The confession hung in the air between them, intimate, painful, but somehow healing in its honesty. "I'm still sorry for invading your privacy," Becca said quietly. Silas nodded, accepting the apology without further comment. Then, in a clear attempt to move past the moment, he gestured to the rabbits. "Storm's coming faster than I thought. Best get these dressed before it hits." That night, the storm broke with savage intensity. Wind howled around the cabin, rattling the shutters and testing the newly completed wall. Rain lashed at the windows, driven sideways by the gale. Occasional flashes of lightning illuminated the interior in stark bursts of brilliance, followed by thunder that seemed to shake the very mountain. Silas moved to secure the shutters, checking that no leaks threatened their shelter. The conversation about his letters about Hannah and Lily all were tabled by the immediate concerns of survival. As darkness fell and the storm intensified, Silas surprised Becca by not retreating to the storehouse. Instead, he made a pallet near the hearth, stoking the fire to combat the sudden chill. "Storehouse roof might leak," he explained gruffly. "Better to stay in here tonight." Becca nodded, understanding the practical necessity. Yet, as she lay in the narrow bed listening to the storm rage outside and Silas's steady breathing near the fire, she felt a curious sense of safety despite the tempest. For the first time since her mother's disappearance, someone else shared her burden of questions, her need for answers. In the flickering firelight, she made a silent promise to Hannah and Lily, whose lives had been cut short, and to her mother, Catherine, whose fate remained unknown. She would use every ability she possessed, including her perfect memory, to help Silas find the truth and bring those responsible to justice. Outside, the storm raged on, but within the cabin, a fragile peace had been established, the peace that comes from shared purpose and mutual understanding. The storm continued through the night and into the next day, keeping them confined to the cabin. Far from being awkward, the forced proximity cemented their growing partnership. Silas taught Becca more about the investigation he'd been conducting, the patterns of disappearances, the connections to establishments like the Golden Spike, the suspected roots of the trafficking operation. "Porter runs a sophisticated network," he explained, as they sat at the table, a rough map of the Dakota Territory spread between them. "Girls taken from saloons like the Golden Spike get sent to mining camps up north or west to the fancy houses in Helena and beyond. The pretty ones, the young ones, fetch the highest prices." "And the others?" Becca asked quietly. "The ones you found in the woods." Silas's face hardened. "The ones who fight back. The ones who learn too much. The ones who try to escape." Outside, the wind shrieked around the cabin's eaves, punctuating his words with nature's fury. Lightning flashed, illuminating the grim determination in Silas's eyes. "I've been working alone too long," he admitted, "always a step behind. But with your memory, with what you saw in that notebook, we could finally prove the connection," Becca finished, "between Porter Caldwell and the trafficking." Silas nodded. "Need to get access to that notebook again, or find other evidence that would convince Marshal Hollister in Rapid City. He's honest, from what I've heard, not in Porter's pocket." "Rapid City," Becca repeated. "How far to?" "2 days' ride in good weather." Silas glanced toward the window where rain still lashed against the glass. "When this clears, we'll go. Federal Marshal's office there might have records from St. Louis. Maybe something about your mother." Becca's heart quickened at the prospect. "You think there might be a connection between what happened to my mother and what's happening now?" "Too many coincidences otherwise. Catherine Morgan disappears in St. Louis, 1863, after discovering something about missing women. 13 years later, her daughter nearly gets sold to a saloon involved in the same kind of trafficking." Silas's eyes narrowed. "And Porter recognized me, I'm sure of it. He was operating in St. Louis back then before he moved his operation west." The pieces were fitting together, forming a picture darker than Becca had imagined. Not just her mother's disappearance, but a web of exploitation and murder spanning 15 years and hundreds of miles. And at its center, Colonel Harland Porter, the elegant Southern gentleman with the cold eyes and the Confederate gray vest. "Why haven't you gone to the authorities before now?" she asked. "With what you know, tried, more than once." Silas's voice was grim. "But Porter's got influence, money, connections that reach all the way to the territorial governor, and no concrete proof, just the graves of women no one misses, and the word of a disgraced former detective." He looked at her directly. "That's why that notebook is so important. Names, dates, prices, locations, all written down. Proof that can't be ignored or explained away." The storm continued through the day and into the night. As darkness fell again, Silas stoked the fire and surprised Becca by pulling a small slate and piece of chalk from the trunk at the foot of the bed. "Thought you might want this," he said almost diffidently. "If you're going to use that memory of yours to help, might as well have something to make notes with." Becca took the slate, touched by the gesture. "Where did you get this?" "Trading post down in Rapid City. Bought it a while back." "For who?" The question slipped out before she could stop herself. Silas's expression closed briefly. Then, with visible effort, he answered, "Lily. She was starting to learn her letters before." He trailed off, unable to finish. "I'll take good care of it," Becca promised softly. That night, as the storm began to abate, they made plans for the journey to Rapid City. Silas would teach Becca to shoot, "just in case," he said, and they would leave as soon as the trails were passable, taking the north route to avoid the more traveled paths where Porter's men might be watching. As Becca drifted towards sleep, lulled by the diminishing patter of rain on the roof and the soft crackle of the fire, she felt a strange sense of purpose filling the hollow places grief had carved in her soul. For 13 years, she had carried the mystery of her mother's disappearance alone, with no way to search for answers, no one to share the burden. Now, in this remote cabin with this scarred, solitary man, she had found an unlikely ally in her quest for truth. Together, perhaps, they could untangle the web of lies that had ensnared both their families. Together, perhaps, they could finally bring Porter and his operation to justice. Outside, the storm gave one last howl before subsiding into a gentle rain washing the world clean under the star-filled sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers. But for tonight, in this moment of calm between storms, Becca felt something she had almost forgotten: hope. Dawn broke clear after the storm, revealing a transformed landscape. Raindrops clung to pine needles like thousands of tiny crystals, catching the morning light in prisms of color. The air felt scrubbed clean, carrying the sharp scent of wet earth and pine resin that Becca drew deep into her lungs. Silas stood on the cabin porch, rifle cradled in his arms, surveying the clearing with the patient vigilance of a man who had learned never to take safety for granted. His trained eye noted signs of the storms passing a branch down near the corral, a new rivulet cutting across the path to the creek. But no human disturbance, no tracks where there shouldn't be. Inside, Becca was preparing a simple breakfast of cornmeal mush and the last of the dried berries they'd gathered before the storm. Her fingers worked automatically while her mind churned with yesterday's revelations, the connection between her mother's disappearance in St. Louis and Porter's operation in Dakota Territory, the shared fate of Hannah and Lily Winters, the web of corruption that had protected the guilty for 15 years. "Trail's muddy," Silas announced as he returned inside, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. Water droplets scattered from the brim, catching the light from the window. "Need another day to dry before we head to Rapid City." He checked his rifle 1, 2, 3 times before setting it in the rack. The ritual was as natural to him as breathing, a habit born of military discipline and the understanding that his life had once depended on a weapon's reliability. Might again. "We'll use the time for practice," he added, helping himself to the steaming mush Becca had ladled into a wooden bowl. "You need to learn to handle that Winchester properly." "I've fired a gun before," Becca said, sitting across from him at the rough-hewn table. "My father taught Franklin and I watched." Silas's eyebrow rose slightly. "Watching isn't doing. I remember every movement, every instruction." She tapped her temple. "Perfect memory, remember." A ghost of a smile touched Silas's lips, gone almost before it appeared. "Memory's one thing, muscle's another. After breakfast, we'll see how well that memory translates to action." They ate in companionable silence, the clink of spoons against wooden bowls the only sound. Outside, birds had begun their morning chorus, a welcome change from the howling wind of the previous days. When they finished, Silas led Becca to a small clearing behind the cabin, where he had set up crude targets, tin cans on a fallen log, a flour sack stuffed with pine needles hanging from a branch. "First rule of shooting," he said, handing her the Winchester, "is to treat every gun as if it's loaded, even when you know it's not." Becca nodded, taking the rifle with appropriate respect. It was heavier than she'd expected, the metal cool against her palms, the wood of the stock smooth from years of handling. "Second rule, never point it at anything you don't intend to shoot." "And the third?" she asked, already adjusting her grip to match what she'd observed from Franklin's lessons. "Know what's behind your target." Silas moved behind her, his voice dropping into a teaching cadence. "Bullets don't always stop where you aim." For the next hour, he guided her through the basics: how to load, how to aim, how to control her breathing. Becca proved a quick study, her perfect memory allowing her to replicate his instructions with precision. But as Silas had predicted, there was a difference between knowing and doing. Her first shots went wide, the rifle's recoil stronger than she'd anticipated, jarring her shoulder and throwing off her aim. "Again," Silas would say each time, neither frustrated nor surprised by her misses. "Adjust your stance, feet shoulder-width apart. Breathe out as you squeeze, don't pull." By midday, Becca had managed to hit the closest targets consistently. Her shoulder ached from the recoil, her ears rang from the reports, but a quiet satisfaction warmed her chest. This was a skill that might make the difference in the days to come. "That's enough for today," Silas finally declared. "You've got the basics. Rest of it comes with practice." They returned to the cabin, where Silas surprised her by pulling out a map of the Dakota Territory and spreading it on the table. "Need to plan our route," he explained. "Porter's men will be watching the main trails. Becca studied the map, her perfect memory cataloging every detail, the winding paths through the Black Hills, the location of settlements and way stations, the rivers and streams that cut through the rugged terrain. "You think they're already looking for us?" she asked. "Certain of it." Silas's finger traced a line on the map. "Porter doesn't like loose ends, and we're a threat to his whole operation. Because of what I might have seen in the notebook. That and who I am." Silas's expression darkened. He recognized me at the Golden Spike. Maybe not right away, but he remembers. 5 years isn't long enough to forget the detective who almost exposed his trafficking ring in St. Louis. A chill ran down Becca's spine. "You think he connected me to the Catherine in his records?" "Possible." Silas rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "If he did, it's another reason he'll want us both silenced." And the reality of their situation settled between them, two people against a powerful criminal with resources, connections, and hired guns at his disposal. The odds were daunting, but not insurmountable. They had advantages of their own: Silas's knowledge of the wilderness and investigation skills, Becca's perfect memory, and the element of surprise. Porter wouldn't expect them to take the offensive. As they bent over the map, plotting their route to Rapid City, a sound from outside froze them both, the distant but unmistakable crunch of footsteps on the forest floor. Silas moved with practiced efficiency, retrieving his rifle and motioning for Becca to stay low and quiet. He eased toward the window, positioning himself to see without being seen. Becca's heart hammered in her chest as she weighted the Winchester Silas had given her for practice, now clutched in trembling hands. The footsteps grew closer, accompanied by the occasional snap of twigs. Then a voice called out, aged but strong, deliberately pitched to carry, "Winters, it's Ezra. Don't shoot an old man for bringing news." Silas relaxed marginally, though his rifle remained ready. "Stay here," he instructed Becca before moving to the door. Ezra Johnson stood at the edge of the clearing, an elderly black man with skin weathered by decades in the wilderness. His white hair contrasted sharply with his dark complexion, and he leaned on a gnarled walking stick. Despite his apparent age, his eyes were sharp and alert, missing nothing as they swept across the cabin and surroundings. "Bit jumpy today, aren't you?" Ezra observed as Silas approached, rifle still in hand. "Careful, not jumpy," Silas corrected. "What brings you up this way, Ezra? News that couldn't wait." Ezra glanced toward the cabin. "That her Morgan's daughter?" Silas nodded. "Come inside. Coffee's still warm." In the cabin, Becca studied their visitor with undisguised curiosity as Silas made introductions. There was a dignity to Ezra's bearing that belied his rough clothing and advanced years. He accepted the coffee she offered with a courtly nod that spoke of an upbringing far removed from the wilderness. "So," Ezra said, after taking an appreciative sip, "Walter Morgan's daughter. Last I heard you were headed for the Golden Spike." "News travels fast," Becca observed. "Always does." Ezra's dark eyes assessed her keenly. "Especially when it involves Colonel Porter's business arrangements." Silas sat across from them, alert to the mention of Porter's name. "What news, Ezra?" The old man set down his cup, his expression grave. "Found another girl yesterday, down by Whitewood Creek. Young, maybe 18. Throat cut." Silas went very still. "Same as the others." "Worse." Ezra's gaze flicked briefly to Becca, clearly measuring his words in her presence. "Made an example of her. Left a note pinned to her dress. This is what happens to runaways." A muscle worked in Silas's jaw. A message. "For anyone thinking of leaving the Golden Spike," Ezra agreed. "And maybe for you two as well." The implications hung heavy in the cabin's close air. Porter was escalating, becoming more brutal, more public with his warnings. The pressure to silence Silas and Becca, The only ones who could connect him to both the Deadwood operation and the St. Louis murders would only increase. "How do you know all this?" Becca asked, studying the old man with new intensity. There was more to Ezra Johnson than a simple trapper. A shadow passed across Ezra's weathered features. "Lost my daughter to men like Porter. 20 years ago now, St. Louis riverfront. She was working as a laundress at a hotel when she disappeared." His voice roughened with old grief. "Never found her. Never got answers." Understanding dawned in Becca's eyes. "That's why you help Silas." Ezra nodded. "Been watching Porter's operation since he came to Deadwood, counting the girls who vanish, listening to whispers, waiting for a chance to bring him down." The revelation transformed Ezra, in Becca's eyes, no longer just a wilderness hermit, but a man with his own stake in their mission, his own wound that had never healed. She felt a kinship with him, another child robbed of a parent by Porter's cruelty. "We're heading to Rapid City tomorrow," Silas told Ezra. "Marshal Hollister might help if we can convince him what Porter's doing." "Hollister's a good man, honest." Ezra stroked his white beard thoughtfully. "But he's just one lawman against Porter's money and connections. He's our best chance," Becca insisted. "With what we know, we might have enough to convince him to investigate." "There's something else," Ezra said, reaching into his jacket. "Something you should see." He withdrew a folded newspaper worn at the creases from multiple readings. "Deadwood Pioneer," he explained, spreading it on the table. 3 days old now. The front page carried a story about a mining dispute, but Ezra pointed to a smaller article near the bottom. The headline read, "Colonel Porter Announces Railroad Investment." "Porter's bringing in Eastern investors," Ezra explained. "Planning a spur line from the Union Pacific to Deadwood. Means more money, more influence." Silas scanned the article, his expression darkening. "And more girls brought in to entertain the railroad men." "And more shipments going out," Becca added, the implications clear. With railroad access, Porter's trafficking operation could expand exponentially, moving victims farther and faster than ever before. "There's a meeting tomorrow night," Ezra continued, "at the Grand Central Hotel in Deadwood. Porter, the investors, territorial officials, all gathering to finalize the arrangements." Silas and Becca exchanged a glance, both recognizing the opportunity this presented. With Porter occupied at the meeting, the Golden Spike might be less heavily guarded. The notebook might be accessible. "Dangerous thinking," Ezra observed, reading their silent communication, "but I reckon you two aren't strangers to danger." "We need that notebook," Silas said simply. "It's the proof we need to take to Hollister." "And it might contain information about my mother," Becca added, "Catherine Morgan, who disappeared from St. Louis 13 years ago. Ezra's eyes widened slightly. "Catherine Morgan," he repeated slowly, testing the name. "From St. Louis." "You knew her?" Becca asked, heart quickening. "Knew of her." Ezra's gaze grew distant with memory. "I was working the riverboats after the war. Word spread about a woman asking questions about missing girls. White woman unusual for those days. Most folks didn't care what happened to colored girls like my Josephine." He paused, collecting himself. "Then this Catherine disappeared too. Some said she'd found evidence against important men, that she'd been silenced." "Like my wife and daughter," Silas said quietly. 5 years ago. Same pattern," Ezra agreed. "Investigation, discovery, elimination." He looked at Becca with new understanding. "You're trying to finish what your mother started." "Yes." The simple word carried the weight of 13 years of wondering, of searching for answers to questions she hadn't fully understood. Ezra nodded, a decision forming in his dark eyes. Then I'll help you get that notebook. They spent the remainder of the day formulating their plan. With Ezra's knowledge of Deadwood and Silas's investigative experience, a strategy emerged bold, dangerous, but with a chance of success. The Grand Central meeting starts at 8, Ezra explained, drawing a rough map of Deadwood's main street. Porter will have at least 4 men with him for security. That leaves Caldwell and maybe 2 others at the Golden Spike. Still bad odds, Silas noted, but better than trying to hit both Porter and Caldwell together. I can create a distraction, Ezra offered, something to draw attention away from the Golden Spike. Maybe a fire in a wagon near the Grand Central. Risky, Silas cautioned. Ezra's smile was grim. At my age, what's left to risk? My daughter's been gone 20 years. About time her old father did something besides mourn. There was no dissuading him. The plan was set. Ezra would create a diversion near the Grand Central Hotel while Silas and Becca slipped into the Golden Spike through the rear entrance. Caldwell's office would likely contain the notebook, probably in a safe. Silas, with his police background, had experience opening safes. If successful, they would retrieve the evidence and escape Deadwood before Porter's meeting concluded, riding through the night to reach Rapid City and Marshal Hollister by morning. As dusk approached, Ezra prepared to leave, needing time to make his own preparations in Deadwood. Meet me at the old miners' cemetery at sundown tomorrow, he instructed. I'll bring disguises and fresh horses. Be careful, Becca said, surprising herself by embracing the old man. Porter has eyes everywhere. Ezra patted her shoulder awkwardly, unused to such displays. Been hiding in plain sight for years, girl. Porter's men look right through an old colored man. My invisibility is our advantage. After he departed, Silas and Becca spent the evening in quiet preparation, checking weapons, selecting clothing that wouldn't stand out, reviewing the layout of the Golden Spike based on what Silas remembered from his previous visits to Deadwood. You should stay here, Silas said abruptly as they finished their preparations. It's too dangerous. Becca looked up sharply. We've already decided I'm going. Porter's men will be watching for both of us. If something goes wrong, you'll need me, she countered. My memory could make the difference, besides, she added, her voice softening. This is my fight, too. My mother's fight. Silas studied her face in the lamplight, seeing the determination that hardened her delicate features. She wasn't the frightened young woman he'd rescued from the Golden Spike steps a week ago. Adversity had tempered her, revealing a core of steel he recognized all too well. All right, he conceded finally. But you follow my lead. If I say run, you run. No heroics. Same goes for you, she responded. No sacrificial last stands. We both make it out, or neither of us does. The statement hung between them, weighted with implications neither was ready to examine. Instead, they turned to practical matters: what to pack, when to leave, how to approach Deadwood undetected. Sleep came fitfully that night. Becca lay on the narrow bed, staring at the shadows cast by the dying fire, imagining what tomorrow might bring. Success would mean answers, justice, perhaps even closure for the wounds that had shaped her life. Failure meant capture, probably death, certainly the continuation of Porter's reign of terror. In the stillness, she heard Silas shift on his pallet near the hearth, equally wakeful despite the long day. Silas, she said softly into the darkness. Are you afraid? He was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. Then, yes. The simple honesty of his response surprised her. Of dying? No. His voice was contemplative in the darkness. Of failing again. You didn't fail Hannah and Lily, Becca said gently. Didn't protect them either. The self-recrimination in his voice was palpable. Was so focused on the investigation, on gathering evidence, that I didn't see the danger until it was too late. You couldn't have known, should have. He cut her off. Was a detective, trained to see threats. His voice softened with regret. But I was arrogant. Thought following procedure building a proper case would protect them. Was wrong. The confession hung in the air between them raw with years of guilt and grief. Becca understood then why Silas had retreated to the wilderness, why he had pursued Porter alone for 5 years. It wasn't just about justice, it was about atonement. Tomorrow will be different, she promised. We're not alone this time. Silas made no reply, but something in the quality of his silence suggested her words had reached him. Eventually, the rhythm of his breathing evened out, signaling sleep had finally claimed him. Becca remained awake a while longer, watching the dying embers in the hearth cast their fading glow across the cabin. Tomorrow, they would confront the man responsible for so much suffering, her mother's disappearance, Hannah and Lily's deaths, the unnamed women in the woods. The danger was real, but so was the purpose driving them. With that thought, she too drifted into sleep, her dreams filled with fire and shadowy figures, notebooks filled with names of the missing, and a silver pendant shaped like a bird in flight. They left the cabin at mid-morning, traveling light and fast. Silas had cached most of their supplies, keeping only what was essential for the mission ahead, weapons, tools for the safe, the dark lantern that would allow them to see without being seen. They rode double on the bay, gelding, taking a circuitous route toward Deadwood that avoided the main trails where Porter's men might be watching. The day was clear, the autumn sun warming the pine-scented air as they descended from the higher elevations. Neither spoke much, conserving energy and focus for the task ahead. Occasionally, Silas would point out signs of wildlife or changes in the terrain, teaching even now, preparing her for a future when she might need to navigate these hills alone. By late afternoon, they had reached the outskirts of Deadwood, stopping in a dense stand of pines overlooking the settlement. From this vantage point, they could see the town sprawled along the gulch, wooden buildings clustered along the main street, miners' tents, and crude shacks spreading outward, the larger structures of businesses and saloons dominating the scene. Grand Central Hotel, Silas pointed to an imposing 3-story building near the center of town. Light already blazed from its windows, despite the early hour figures moving behind lace curtains. Porter's meeting will take place in the private dining room on the 2nd floor. And the Golden Spike? Becca asked, scanning the buildings below. There, Silas indicated a 2-story structure at the edge of the main business district. Even from this distance, they could hear faint piano music and raucous laughter drifting up from its open windows. Back entrance faces a service alley. That's our way in. They remained in their observation point until dusk, watching the town's rhythm miners returning from claims businesses closing for the day, saloons and gambling houses coming alive with evening patrons. Lights began to appear in windows as the shadow of the surrounding hills crept across the gulch. "Time to move," Silas said, as the last direct sunlight faded from the highest buildings. "We'll leave the horse here, approach on foot." They made their way down to the old miners' cemetery on the town's edge, a solemn collection of wooden crosses and crude headstones marking those who had succumbed to accidents, disease, or violence in the pursuit of gold. Among these anonymous markers, Ezra waited a dark silhouette against the twilight sky. "Half expected you wouldn't come," he said as they approached. "Said we would," Silas replied simply. Ezra nodded, then handed them each a bundle of clothing. "Put these on. You'll attract less attention." Becca unfolded her bundle to find a simple dress and shawl of the type worn by working women in Deadwood, practical, unassuming, forgettable. Silas's bundle contained a miner's jacket and cap, equally nondescript. "Porter's men are looking for a mountain man in buckskins," "And a young woman in a blue dress," Ezra explained. "Not a miner, and his woman headed for the saloons." They changed quickly, the cemetery providing sufficient privacy in the gathering darkness. Becca tied her hair back with a strip of cloth, pulling the shawl forward to shadow her face. Silas looked markedly different in the miner's garb, the cap pulled low over his eyes, his distinctive beard partially hidden by a folded bandana. "Grand Central's filling up," Ezra reported as they prepared to enter town. Porter arrived with 4 men, territorial officials and railroad men coming in fancy carriages. His voice held undisguised contempt, all acting like they're planning something honest, not expansion of a flesh trade. "And the Golden Spike?" Silas asked. "Caldwell's there with at least 2 men, another watching the front door." "And the back?" Becca inquired. "Usually unguarded," Ezra said. "But tonight, who knows, Porter might have ordered extra precautions." Silas checked his revolver, ensuring it was loaded and ready. The sound of the cylinder clicking into place sent a shiver down Becca's spine, a reminder of the very real danger they were walking into. Ezra handed Becca a small knife in a leather sheath. "Just in case," he said. "Sometimes a woman's best defense is something they don't see coming." She tucked it into her boot, the weight of it unfamiliar but somehow reassuring. "I'll create a distraction at 9 o'clock, Ezra continued. "Something to draw attention away from the Golden Spike. You'll have maybe 15 minutes before things settle." "Enough time," Silas said confidently. "If you're not out in 20 minutes, I'll come looking," Ezra promised. "Though what an old man like me could do against Porter's guns." He shrugged, a wry smile creasing his weathered face. "Just be ready with the horses," Silas instructed. "South edge of town by the blacksmiths." With that, they parted ways, Ezra heading toward the busier section of town, Silas and Becca taking a more circuitous route toward the Golden Spike. They moved casually like any couple out for an evening's entertainment, Silas' arm around Becca's shoulders in a protective gesture that was only partially for show. The Golden Spike was doing brisk business despite the important gathering at the Grand Central. Miners, gamblers, and travelers filled its brightly lit saloon, the sounds of piano music, laughter, and clinking glasses spilling into the street. Through the windows, Becca could see women in gaudy dresses circulating among the tables, serving drinks and flirting with customers. Her stomach twisted as she realized that some of these women might be the next victims, the next names in Caldwell's notebook, the next bodies Silas would find in the woods. The thought strengthened her resolve. This wasn't just about her mother or Hannah and Lily anymore. It was about preventing more deaths, more suffering. They passed the front entrance without pausing, continuing down the street and turning into the narrow alley that ran behind the row of businesses. Here the night was darker, the sounds of revelry muffled by walls and distance. Service doors lined the alley, kitchens, storerooms, private entrances for those who preferred discretion. The Golden Spike's back door was unmarked, but identifiable by the fresh paint and sturdy lock. Silas studied it briefly, then removed several small tools from his pocket. "Keep watch," he murmured to Becca as he knelt before the lock. She positioned herself at the corner of the building where she could observe both the alley and a portion of the main street. The night air carried a chill, and she pulled the borrowed shawl tighter around her shoulders, trying to appear as inconspicuous as possible while her heart hammered against her ribs. Behind her, she could hear the faint sounds of Silas working on the lock, metal against metal, barely audible above the ambient noise of the town. Then, a soft click, and his whispered, "Got it." The door swung open silently on well-oiled hinges, revealing a darkened hallway beyond. Silas lit the dark lantern designed to focus light in a single direction without casting a telltale glow, and motioned for Becca to follow him inside. They found themselves in a service corridor that connected the saloon's kitchen to the main floor and upper rooms. From ahead, came the muted sounds of the saloon piano music laughter, the clinking of glasses. To their right, a narrow staircase led to the second floor, where private rooms for gambling and other entertainment were located. "Caldwell's office," Becca whispered, her voice barely audible even to herself. "Upstairs," Silas confirmed. "End of the hall." They ascended the stairs, carefully testing each step to avoid creaks that might betray their presence. At the top, the hallway stretched in both directions, lined with doors. Most were closed, but light spilled from beneath several, along with sounds that made Becca flush and look away. Silas led the way toward the end of the corridor, moving with the silent grace of a man accustomed to stalking prey. They paused at each intersecting passage, listening for movement, until they reached the door marked "Private" in gold lettering. "This is it," Silas whispered, pressing his ear to the wood. After a moment, he shook his head. "Can't tell if anyone is inside." He tried the handle cautiously, locked as expected. Again the tools came out, applied with practiced skill to the mechanism. This lock proved more challenging than the exterior door, requiring several tense minutes before yielding with a barely audible click. Silas eased the door open just enough to peer inside. The office was dark and apparently empty. A large desk dominated one wall, bookshelves another, and a painting of a woman in a blue dress hung prominently above a small fireplace. "The safe," Becca whispered, pointing to the painting. Ezra's information had been correct. Silas nodded, opening the door wider to admit them both. He closed it quietly behind them, then crossed to the painting and carefully lifted it from the wall, revealing a small iron safe embedded in the brick. "Can you open it?" Becca asked anxiously. Given time, Ida set to work, ear pressed against the metal, as he delicately manipulated the dial, listening for the subtle clicks of the tumblers within. Becca moved to the desk, searching for anything that might contain useful information. The drawers were locked, but her small knife served as an impromptu pry tool, allowing her to ease the top one open. Inside, she found business correspondence receipts, bills of sale for liquor, and supplies, the ordinary paperwork of running a saloon. The second drawer proved more interesting. It contained a ledger different from the business accounts, with entries that referred to acquisitions and placements. Girls' names appeared alongside figures and destinations: Helena, Rapid City, Black Rock Camp. This was clearly part of the trafficking operation, but not the comprehensive record they sought. "Silas," she whispered urgently, "I found something." But before he could respond, a distant commotion erupted from the direction of the main street, shouts, running, feet, the alarm of a fire bell. Ezra's distraction had begun. "Perfect timing," Silas murmured, returning his attention to the safe. Moments later, he was rewarded with a solid click as the mechanism released. The door swung open, revealing the contents, stacks of currency, legal documents, and a small black leather-bound book. "The notebook," Becca breathed as Silas withdrew it. He handed it to her without opening it. "Check it. Your memory will be faster than me reading through it." Becca flipped through the pages quickly, her perfect recall capturing every name, date, and location. The entries went back 15 years, organized by year and location. St. Louis entries occupied the first third of the book, followed by Helena, then Deadwood, as Porter's operation moved westward, and there, in the St. Louis section, the entry she had glimpsed at the Golden Spike. Catherine Morgan, 1863, eliminated, threat to operation. Her heart stuttered. Eliminated. The clinical coldness of the word chilled her to the bone. For 13 years she had wondered about her mother's fate. Now she knew with a terrible certainty that left her numb. "She's in here," Becca whispered, fighting to keep her voice steady. "My mother. It says eliminated." Silas's expression hardened. "Keep looking. Any mention of Hannah or Lily, Becca flipped forward to entries from 5 years ago, finding them quickly. Hannah Winters, 1871, eliminated with child. Security measure against SW investigation. A wave of nausea swept through her. It was one thing to suspect another, to see it written so callously, lives reduced to entries in a business ledger. "It's here," she confirmed grimly. "Both of them, listed as a security measure against your investigation." Something dangerous flashed in Silas's eyes, a cold fury she had never seen before. But his voice remained controlled when he spoke. "Any mention of Sullivan?" "The police captain from St. Louis." Becca checked the earliest pages, finding a section labeled Assets that listed names of officials, journalists, and businessmen who had been bribed or blackmailed into cooperation. Sullivan's name appeared prominently with regular payments dating back to 1862. "He's here, listed as an asset, payments going back 14 years. "The whole damn system was corrupt," Silas muttered, taking the notebook from her and tucking it securely inside his jacket. "That's why my investigation kept hitting walls." The reality of what they'd discovered settled over them, not just isolated crimes, but a vast conspiracy spanning years and territories protected by the very officials who should have stopped it. This notebook wasn't just evidence. It was dynamite capable of destroying careers, reputations, perhaps even the territorial government itself. "We need to go," Silas said. "Now." They had just reached the office door when footsteps sounded in the hallway outside, heavy boots approaching with purposeful strides. Silas pulled Becca back, positioning himself between her and the door, revolver ready. The footsteps paused outside the office. A key rattled in the lock. Silas raised his weapon as the door began to open. "Caldwell," a voice called from further down the hallway. "Porter needs you at the Grand Central. Now." The door stopped moving, still only partially open. "What for?" Caldwell's voice replied irritably. "Didn't say. Just sent a man over. Says it's urgent, something about the railroad investors getting nervous with all the commotion." A moment of hesitation, then, "Fine. Tell him I'm coming." The door closed, the key turning in the lock once more. The footsteps receded down the hallway, accompanied by muttered complaints about Porter's demands. Becca released the breath she'd been holding, her heart pounding so hard she was sure Caldwell must have heard it. That was close. "Too close," Silas agreed. "Time to leave." He relocked the safe and replaced the painting while Becca quickly arranged the desk drawers as she had found them. Within minutes, they had erased all signs of their presence and were slipping back into the hallway. The commotion from the main street had drawn many of the Golden Spike's patrons and staff outside, leaving the back corridors largely deserted. They descended the stairs quickly but cautiously, alert for anyone who might have remained behind. They had just reached the service corridor when a door opened ahead of them and a young woman in a gaudy saloon dress emerged from the kitchen. She froze at the sight of them, eyes widening with surprise and fear. "Please," Becca said quickly, stepping forward. "We're not here to hurt anyone." The woman's gaze darted from Becca to Silas, then to the dark lantern and his partly concealed revolver. Understanding dawned in her eyes. "You're robbing the place." "No," Becca corrected. "We're looking for evidence against Porter and Caldwell, about the girls who've disappeared." The woman's expression changed, wariness giving way to something harder, more knowing. "Like Mary and Elizabeth." "Yes," Silas confirmed. "And others." The woman studied them for a long moment, indecision clear in her face. Then she nodded toward the rear door. "Back door's still clear. I'll count to 100 before I say anything." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Make them pay. For all of us. We will—" Becca promised, a lump forming in her throat at this unexpected alliance. The woman nodded once, then turned and hurried toward the front of the saloon, leaving them alone in the corridor. They slipped out the back door and into the alley, Silas pausing only long enough to relock it behind them. The commotion was still ongoing near the Grand Central Hotel. Ezra's distraction apparently involved a wagon that had mysteriously caught fire in the street. Moving casually but purposefully, they made their way toward the south edge of town, avoiding the busier streets where Porter's men might be watching. The blacksmith shop was dark and closed for the night, but in the shadows behind it waited Ezra with 3 horses, their bay gelding, and 2 fresh mounts. "Got what you needed?" the old man asked as they approached. Silas patted his jacket, where the notebook was hidden. "Everything. Names, dates, connections going back 15 years. You did good work, Ezra." "Fire wagon was a bit much," Ezra admitted with a twinkle in his eye. "But it got the job done." "Anyone hurt?" Becca asked, concerned. "Nah, just some old hay and a broken-down wagon I bought for $5. Ezra helped her mount one of the fresh horses. "But it sure got their attention." They were preparing to ride out when shouts erupted from the direction of the Golden Spike, followed by the pounding of running feet. "Someone found your handiwork," Ezra observed grimly. "Time to go," Silas said, swinging into the saddle. "Rapid City as planned." "I'll lead them off," Ezra offered, mounting the 3rd horse. "Head east toward Sturgis for a while, then double back. Meet you at Hollister's tomorrow." Before they could protest, the old man was riding away, deliberately making enough noise to attract attention as he headed in the opposite direction from their planned route. "Brave old man," Silas murmured, watching him go. "Will he be all right?" Becca asked anxiously. "Ezra's been outwitting folks in these hills for 30 years. He'll be fine." Silas turned his horse toward the south trail. "Let's make his distraction count." They rode hard through the darkness, leaving Deadwood behind, as they followed a little-used trail that would eventually connect with the road to Rapid City. The notebook tucked against Silas's chest contained everything they had sought proof of Porter's crimes, stretching back 15 years. Evidence of Catherine Morgan's fate, confirmation of Hannah and Lily's murder, names of officials who had been corrupted. It was enough to bring down Porter's entire operation, enough to convince Marshal Hollister to take action. Justice for the dead, protection for the living. If they could reach Rapid City safely. The moon rose higher, casting silver light across the autumn landscape as they rode. Behind them, the glow of Deadwood's lights receded into the distance. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, but also the promise of resolution. For the first time in 13 years, Becca knew what had happened to her mother. For the first time in 5 years, Silas had concrete evidence of who had ordered his family's murder. The knowledge was painful, but it was also freeing. The truth, however terrible, was preferable to the limbo of uncertainty. They rode steadily through the night, pushing the horses as hard as they dared on the rough terrain. By dawn, they had covered nearly 20 miles, putting significant distance between themselves and Deadwood. They stopped briefly to rest the horses and drink from a clear mountain stream. "We should reach Rapid City by nightfall," Silas calculated, studying the position of the rising sun. "If we keep this pace." Becca nodded, splashing cold water on her face to wash away the dust of the trail. The enormity of what they had discovered, of what lay ahead, was still settling over her. "My father," she said suddenly, the thought occurring to her with jarring clarity. The notebook didn't mention him. He wasn't listed as an asset or collaborator. Silas considered this. Doesn't mean he wasn't involved. Could have been a minor player not worth recording. Or he might not have known what happened to her, Becca speculated. Maybe he really believed she died of fever or ran away. Possible, Silas allowed, though his tone suggested skepticism. But he still sold his daughter to the same operation. Hard to believe that's coincidence. Before Becca could respond, the distant sound of hoofbeats reached them, multiple riders approaching from the direction they had come. Silas was instantly alert, hand moving to his revolver. "Porter's men," he concluded grimly. "They must have seen through Ezra's diversion." They mounted quickly, urging their horses back onto the trail. But the sounds behind them grew steadily louder. Their pursuers were gaining their fresher horses, making better time on the difficult terrain. The trail ahead split into two branches, one continuing toward Rapid City, the other veering west into rougher country that Silas knew well from his hunting expeditions. He reined in his horse, making a swift decision. "We need to split up," he told Becca. "I'll lead them west. You continue to Rapid City with the notebook." "No," Becca protested. "We stay together." "You have the evidence now," Silas insisted. "Everything in that notebook is what we need to bring Porter down. If we both get caught, it's all for nothing." "And if you get caught while I escape," Becca challenged, "what do you think Porter will do to you?" The unspoken answer hung between them, the same fate that had befallen Hannah and Lily, that had claimed Catherine Morgan and countless others. A death meant as a warning to those who might follow. "I've survived worse odds," Silas said, his voice gentler than she'd ever heard it. "And this isn't just about us anymore. It's about every woman in that notebook, every girl who might be next." The hoofbeats grew louder, perhaps a half-mile back now. Silas removed the notebook from inside his jacket, pressing it into Becca's hands. "Tell Hollister everything. Make him understand what Porter's been doing. He's a good man. He'll act on solid evidence." "Silas," she began, but he cut her off. "I'll meet you at Hollister's office. If I'm not there by noon tomorrow, find Ezra. He'll help you." Their eyes locked, 1,000 unspoken words passing between them in that brief moment. Then Silas leaned across the space between their horses and pressed his lips to her forehead, a gesture so unexpected, so gentle, that Becca felt tears spring to her eyes. "Go," he whispered. "Be safe." Before she could respond, he wheeled his horse onto the western trail and rode hard, deliberately, making enough noise to draw attention. Becca hesitated only a moment before continuing on the main trail toward Rapid City, the notebook clutched tightly in her hand, her heart torn between duty and the desperate urge to follow him. Behind her, the pursuing hoofbeats seemed to pause at the fork, then divide, some following Silas into the hills, others continuing after her. The race to Rapid City had become a desperate chase with lives and justice hanging in the balance. Becca urged her horse faster, leaning low over its neck as they galloped across the open country. The wind whipped her hair free of its bindings, the borrowed shawl streaming behind her like a banner. In her mind, she rehearsed what she would tell Marshal Hollister, the names, dates, and connections that proved Porter's crimes beyond any doubt. The pursuers behind her were gaining ground, their shouts carrying on the wind. But ahead, visible now on the horizon, were the first scattered buildings that marked the outskirts of Rapid City. Civilization lost safety, if she could reach them in time. Her horse was tiring its stride, beginning to falter, as fatigue set in. The riders behind were close enough now that she could hear individual voices calling to each other as they coordinated their pursuit. The road widened as it approached the town. Other travelers appearing now, a wagon laden with supplies, a solitary rider heading out a family in a small cart. Witnesses, potential help. Becca called out as she passed them, her voice carrying the desperation of her situation. "Help, men are chasing me! Please, get the marshal!" Some stared in confusion. Others urged their own conveyances faster, wanting no part of whatever trouble followed her. But one rider, a young man on a spirited black horse, wheeled around at her cry and rode alongside her. "What's happening?" he shouted over the drumming of hooves. "Porter's men from Deadwood are after me." Becca gasped. I have evidence of murder. Need Marshal Hollister. The young man's expression hardened with recognition. Follow me. I know a shortcut. He led her through the town streets, taking shortcuts through alleys and behind buildings, eventually emerging near the marshal's office, a sturdy wooden building with the territorial flag flying above its porch. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew confused as Porter's men entered the more populated areas, unable to ride at full speed without drawing unwanted attention. The young man helped Becca dismount as they arrived, her legs nearly buckling after the long, hard ride. Thank you, she breathed. Who are you? Jim Miller, my father's the deputy here. He glanced back the way they had come. Get inside quickly. I'll warn them Porter's men are in town. Becca staggered up the steps and into the marshal's office, the notebook clutched tightly in her hand. Marshal Hollister looked up from his desk, recognition and surprise crossing his weathered face. Miss Morgan, he said, rising quickly. Where's Winters? Led them away, she gasped, struggling to catch her breath. But they're coming! Porter's men followed us from Deadwood. Hollister turned to the deputy at a side desk. Miller, get some men together. Porter's thugs are in town. As the deputy hurried out, Hollister guided Becca to a chair. You look half dead, miss. What happened? With trembling hands, she placed the notebook on his desk. Evidence, she said, her voice steadying as she focused on the culmination of their mission. Against Porter. Proof of everything, the trafficking, the murders, the bribes. Including what happened to my mother and to Silas's family. Hollister picked up the notebook cautiously, as if it might burn him. This is Caldwell's record. Yes, names, dates, locations going back 15 years. Becca's voice gained strength as she continued. St. Louis to Deadwood. Girls sold to mining camps, to houses in Helena and beyond. Those who resisted or knew too much. Eliminated. Like your mother, Hollister gasped. Catherine Morgan, St. Louis, 1863, Becca confirmed. And Silas's wife and daughter, Hannah and Lily Winters, 1871. Hollister's weathered face hardened as he flipped through the pages. This is comprehensive. Names of officials on Porter's payroll, too, I see. Everything, Becca affirmed. Enough to bring him down. For good. A commotion outside drew their attention, shouts, the pounding of boots on the boardwalk. The deputy burst back into the office. Marshal Porter's men are outside. 4 of them armed. Hollister tucked the notebook into his desk drawer, locking it securely. Stay inside, Miss Morgan, he instructed, checking his revolver before heading to the door. This is about to get... The front window exploded inward as a shot rang out, showering the room with broken glass. Becca dove to the floor as Hollister and his deputy returned fire from positions on either side of the door. The gunfight was brief but intense, perhaps a dozen shots exchanged in the space of 30 seconds. Then silence broken only by groans from the street and the shouts of townspeople responding to the disturbance. Got 2 of them, the deputy reported, peering cautiously through the shattered window. Others ran off. Hollister helped Becca to her feet. You all right, miss? She nodded, brushing glass fragments from her borrowed dress. Yes, but Silas? We'll find him, Hollister promised. Right now, we need to get you somewhere safe. Porter won't stop with one attempt. He was right. Becca knew. As long as Porter remained free, as long as he believed she and Silas posed a threat to his operation, the danger would continue. The notebook provided evidence, but prosecuting someone of Porter's influence would take time. Time during which he would use every resource at his disposal to silence those who could testify against him. What about Ezra? She asked suddenly. He helped us. He's supposed to meet us here. Johnson, the old trapper. Hollister's eyebrows rose. Haven't seen him yet. But if he's involved in this, he knows enough to keep his head down until things settle. A deputy arrived with news that a posse had been formed to search for the fleeing gunmen and to watch the roads for any sign of Silas. Hollister arranged for Becca to be taken to his own home, where his wife would see to her needs while he began the process of building a case against Porter. "The territorial judge arrives tomorrow," he told her as they prepared to leave the office by the back door. "With this evidence and your testimony, we can get an arrest warrant for Porter, maybe even federal charges given that the trafficking crossed state lines." It was happening, Becca realized, with a mixture of relief and apprehension. Justice was finally in motion. But at what cost? Silas was still missing, possibly captured or wounded. Ezra had risked his life to help them, and Porter, cornered and desperate, would be more dangerous than ever. As they slipped out the back door of the marshal's office, Becca cast one last glance at the streets of Rapid City, now alive with the aftermath of the gunfight. Somewhere out there, Porter's remaining men were regrouping, planning their next move. Somewhere in the hills, Silas was either evading pursuit or already in their clutches. The notebook was secure, the evidence preserved. But the final chapter of this long struggle remained unwritten. Until Porter was in custody, until Silas was safe, until all the victims had received justice, their work was not complete. Hollister seemed to read her thoughts. "We'll find him, Miss Morgan," he assured her quietly. "Winters is a survivor, been through worse than this, and come out fighting." Becca nodded, drawing strength from the marshal's confidence. Silas was indeed a survivor. He had endured the loss of his family, 5 years of solitary pursuit, countless setbacks and dangers. He wouldn't give up now, not when they were so close to bringing Porter to justice. And neither would she. Catherine Morgan's daughter had inherited more than just her mother's perfect memory. She had inherited her courage, her determination, her refusal to be silenced in the face of evil. As they hurried through the back streets of Rapid City toward the safety of Hollister's home, Becca clutched the small knife Ezra had given her, a tangible reminder of all they had risked and all that remained at stake. The value of freedom was measured in the price paid to secure it. That price had already been grievously high. But the final payment was coming due, and Colonel Harlan Porter was about to learn that some debts can never be outrun, only settled in full. The first light of dawn painted Rapid City in hues of amber and gold as Becca stood at the window of Marshal Hollister's home. Below the town was stirring to life smoke curling from chimneys. Shopkeepers sweeping boardwalks, the blacksmith's hammer already ringing against iron. A town waking to what its citizens believed would be an ordinary day, unaware of the extraordinary events unfolding in their midst. Sleep had eluded Becca through the night, her mind replaying the moment Silas had turned his horse toward the western trail. The grim determination in his eyes, the quiet acceptance of what might await him, as if he had always expected their quest to end with his sacrifice. That image had haunted her driving away rest, despite the comfort of the bed Mrs. Hollister had provided. "You need to put something in that stomach, child, Mrs." Hollister said, entering with a tray. She was a sturdy woman, with graying hair pulled back in a practical bun, her face lined with the experiences of frontier life, but softened by natural kindness. "Thank you," Becca said, accepting the offered breakfast. "Has there been any word?" "Nothing yet about Mr. Winters," Mrs. Hollister replied, her voice gentle but honest. "But John sent word that Judge Harmon arrived on the morning stage. He's reviewing that notebook you brought." Becca nodded relief, mingling with continued anxiety. The territorial judge's presence meant that formal charges could be brought, warrants issued. Justice could begin. But without Silas, "That man of yours is made of stern stuff," Mrs. Hollister said correctly, reading Becca's thoughts. John's seen his type before, men who've crawled through hell with their fingernails. They don't break easy. He's not my man, Becca corrected automatically, though the words felt hollow. Mrs. Hollister's eyes, wise with years of observing human nature, held a knowing look. Best eat up. Today's going to ask much of you. Left alone with her meal, Becca forced herself to eat despite her lack of appetite. She would need her wits and strength for whatever lay ahead. The black notebook was now safely in Marshall Hollister's possession, but her testimony would be crucial in explaining its contents, in helping the judge understand the full scope of Porter's crimes. As she ate, she mentally rehearsed what she would say, facts arranged in cold, irrefutable order. Names, dates, locations spanning 15 years and multiple territories. Evidence of bribery, trafficking, murder. The systematic elimination of anyone who threatened Porter's operation, including Catherine Morgan and Hannah and Lily Winters. A knock at the front door interrupted her thoughts. She heard Mrs. Hollister speaking with someone, the words indistinct, but the tone urgent. Footsteps ascended the stairs, and Mrs. Hollister reappeared, her expression troubled. There's someone asking for you. Says his name is Ezra Johnson. Relief flooded through Becca. Please send him up. Ezra entered moments later, his clothes dust-covered, his aged face lined with new fatigue. The old man seemed to have aged years overnight, yet his dark eyes remained alert, missing nothing. You made it, Becca said, rising to greet him. We feared the worst. Takes more than Porter's boys to catch this old fox, Ezra replied with a grim smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Led him halfway to Sturgis before doubling back. Been riding since midnight. His expression sobered. No word of Silas. Becca shook her head. Nothing since we separated. He drew Porter's men away so I could reach Marshall Hollister with the notebook. Ezra lowered himself into a chair, the movement betraying how bone-weary he truly was. If anyone knows those hills well enough to outfox Porter's men, it's Winters. And his gaze drifted toward the window, toward the distant hills where Silas might be hiding or lying wounded. But Porter ain't a man to show mercy when crossed. The unspoken implication hung heavy between them. They both knew what fate awaited those who threatened Porter's operation. Marshall's assembling men to search, Becca told him, and the judge is reviewing the evidence. Good. Ezra's weathered hand curled into a fist. That notebook should be enough to hang Porter and Caldwell both. His voice dropped bitter with old grief. Though hanging's too merciful for what they've done. First we need to find Silas, Becca said, drawing the conversation back to their most immediate concern. Agreed. And I might know where to look. Ezra leaned forward, lowering his voice, though they were alone in the room. Porter has a private place outside Deadwood. Cabin where he conducts business away from prying eyes. If they caught Silas, that's where they'd take him, not the Golden Spike, not after our little visit stirred things up. Becca's pulse quickened. You know the location. General area. Up near Bear Gulch, well off the main trails. Ezra's expression was grave. But we can't just ride in blind. Porter will have men watching every approach. We need the marshal's help, Becca concluded. A proper posse. And we need to move quick. Ezra's voice held an urgency that sent a chill down Becca's spine. Porter knows by now that notebook's in lawmen's hands. He'll be looking to tie up loose ends before fleeing the territory. The implications were clear. If Porter escaped across territorial lines, he might vanish forever, establishing his operation elsewhere under a new name. And Silas, if he was indeed Porter's captive, would be eliminated as a final loose end before Porter's departure. I need to dress, Becca decided, rising from her chair. We must speak with Marshall Hollister immediately. Within the hour, they stood in Hollister's office. The building bustled with activity deputies coming and going, The territorial judge sequestered in Hollister's private office, reviewing the evidence. Armed guards posted at the door to prevent any attempt by Porter's remaining men to destroy the incriminating notebook. Marshal Hollister met them in a small side room, his face lined with concern and lack of sleep. "Johnson," he acknowledged Ezra with a nod. "Good to see you made it back in one piece." "Barely," Ezra replied dryly. "Porter's men don't much care who catches their bullets." Hollister turned to Becca. "Judge Harmon is reviewing the notebook now. Wants to speak with you before making his decision about warrants." "I'll tell him everything," Becca promised. "But first we need to discuss Silas. We believe Porter may be holding him at a private cabin near Bear Gulch." The marshal's eyebrows rose. "You sure about this?" Ezra stepped forward. "It's where Porter conducts his more private business, away from prying eyes. And you think Winters is there?" Hollister's fingers stroked his mustache thoughtfully. "If they caught him, yes," Becca affirmed. "And if Porter knows we have the notebook, he'll be looking to eliminate witnesses before fleeing. Silas could be in immediate danger." Hollister weighed the urgency against his limited resources. "I've got men searching the trails where you last saw him. Can't spare many for a raid on Porter's cabin without solid evidence he's there." "Then I'll go," Becca declared without hesitation. "Not alone you won't," Ezra interjected, straightening despite his fatigue. "Neither of you is going anywhere," Hollister said firmly. "Miss Morgan, you're our key witness. And Johnson, no offense, but you're not exactly in fighting shape for taking on Porter's gunmen." Ezra bristled. "Been fighting longer than you've been alive, Marshal." Before the argument could escalate, a deputy knocked and entered. "Marshal Judge Harmon wants to see you and Miss Morgan right away. Says it's urgent." Hollister nodded. "We'll continue this discussion later. For now, both of you stay put. That's an order." He led Becca to his office, where Judge Harmon, a spare, austere man with piercing blue eyes and a shock of white hair, sat behind the desk, the black notebook open before him. "Miss Morgan." The judge acknowledged her with a nod that managed to be both formal and respectful. "I've been reviewing this evidence. Most disturbing. Most disturbing indeed." "It's all accurate, Your Honor," Becca assured him. "I can verify much of it from personal experience, and my mother's name is among those listed as eliminated by Porter's organization." The judge nodded gravely. "Marshal Hollister has explained your extraordinary memory. You can recall the contents of this entire notebook." "Yes, sir. Every name, date, and location." "Good, because I'm issuing warrants immediately for Colonel Porter Victor Caldwell and several officials named in this document." The judge's voice was cold with controlled fury. "The trafficking of women across territorial lines is a federal offense. Murder is a hanging offense. And the corruption of public officials strikes at the very heart of law and order in this territory." Relief flooded through Becca. "Thank you, Your Honor." "Don't thank me yet, Miss Morgan. These men are powerful, connected, and now desperate. Bringing them to justice won't be easy." The judge turned to Hollister. "Marshal, you'll need to assemble a force sufficient to apprehend Porter. He's not to be underestimated." "Already in progress, Judge, but we have another situation." Hollister explained about Silas, his current unknown whereabouts, and the possibility that he was being held at Porter's private cabin. Judge Harmon listened intently. "This Winters is a material witness as well." "More than that," Becca interjected. "His wife and child were murdered by Porter's organization 5 years ago. It's documented in the notebook. And he's spent those years gathering evidence, finding victims, trying to bring Porter to justice." The judge's expression softened slightly. "I see. A personal vendetta, but with just cause. He turned back to Hollister. Marshal, you have my authorization to form a second posse specifically to locate and rescue Mr. Winters. Miss Morgan's testimony is crucial, but so is his. We need both to ensure these criminals face the full weight of the law. I want to go with them, Becca declared. Out of the question, Hollister replied immediately. Judge Harmon raised a hand. Actually, Marshal, Miss Morgan's presence might be valuable. If Winters is injured or otherwise compromised, having someone he trusts might be essential. She'd be putting herself at risk, Hollister protested. I've been at risk since the moment I left Deadwood with Silas, Becca countered. I know what's at stake, and I know Porter's cabin location better than anyone except Ezra. The judge considered her for a long moment, then nodded. Very well. Miss Morgan may accompany the rescue party, but, he fixed Hollister with a stern gaze, you will ensure she remains out of direct danger. Is that understood? Yes, Your Honor, the marshal conceded reluctantly. As they left the judge's office, Hollister turned to Becca. I don't like this one bit. Porter's men shoot first and don't bother asking questions at all. I know the risk, Becca said quietly. But Silas risked everything for me. I won't abandon him now. Hollister studied her face, seeing the determination there. You care about him. It wasn't a question, but Becca answered anyway. He saved me from the Golden Spike, gave me shelter when I had nowhere else to go, helped me discover what happened to my mother. She paused, confronting a truth she'd been avoiding. Yes, I care about him. The marshal nodded understanding in his weathered face. We'll find him, but you'll follow my orders to the letter. No heroics. Agreed, Becca promised, though they both knew what her actions would be if Silas's life hung in the balance. By noon, the rescue party was assembled. Marshal Hollister, Deputy Miller, 4 trusted townsmen sworn in as temporary deputies, Ezra Johnson with his ancient but well-maintained rifle, and Becca. They rode out of Rapid City under a sky of hammered blue, taking the western trail toward Bear Gulch and Porter's hidden cabin. A second larger posse, led by Judge Harmon himself, was preparing to ride to Deadwood with warrants for Porter Caldwell and their associates. The net was closing, but the most dangerous phase was at hand. Cornered predators fight most viciously, and Porter was nothing if not a predator. The ride to Bear Gulch was tense, every rider alert for signs of ambush or pursuit. Ezra led the way, his knowledge of the hills proving invaluable as he guided them along game trails and old Indian paths that shaved hours off their journey. Porter's cabin sits just beyond that ridge, Ezra said, as they paused to rest the horses in late afternoon. He pointed toward a heavily wooded slope that rose steeply from the valley floor. Clearings well placed gives sight lines in all directions. Man like Porter doesn't leave much to chance. How many men you reckon he has there? Hollister asked, studying the terrain through a small brass spyglass. Normally, 2-3 guards. But if he's holding Winters and preparing to run, could be twice that. The marshal considered their options. We'll wait until dusk approach from multiple directions. Miller and I will take the front, Johnson and Watson the back. Harrison and Cole will secure the perimeter and horses. What about me? Becca asked, though she already anticipated the answer. You'll stay with Harrison and Cole until we've determined it's safe. Hollister's tone brooked no argument. Remember our agreement. Becca nodded reluctantly. She understood the logic even as every instinct screamed to be part of the initial approach. If Silas was in that cabin injured or worse, they waited as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, the lengthening shadows providing the cover they would need for their approach. Each member checked their weapons one final time. Becca found herself mimicking Silas's ritual, checking her borrowed revolver 3 times exactly as she'd seen him do. The familiar motion brought a strange comfort, as if some part of him was with her. "Time," Hollister announced, as the light faded to the deep blue of early evening. "Remember, we want Porter alive if possible. He needs to stand trial for what he's done. But don't take unnecessary risks. These are desperate men with blood already on their hands." They split into their assigned groups, approaching the cabin from different directions. Becca watched from a sheltered position with Harrison and Cole as the others disappeared into the gathering darkness, moving with the silent efficiency of men accustomed to hunting. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The forest grew quiet, except for the occasional call of a night bird, or the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush. Becca strained her ears for any sound from the direction of the cabin voices, gunshots, anything that might indicate what was happening. Then suddenly, a shout broke the silence, followed immediately by the crack of gunfire. One shot, then another, then a fusillade that seemed to go on forever, but probably lasted only seconds. Becca's hand tightened around the grip of her revolver, every muscle tensed to rush forward despite her promise to stay put. "Easy," Harrison murmured beside her. "Marshall knows what he's doing." More shots rang out, followed by shouts she couldn't quite make out. Then silence again, heavier and more ominous than before. "Should we go check?" Cole asked nervously, his young face pale in the moonlight. Before Harrison could respond, a figure emerged from the direction of the cabin, Deputy Miller moving quickly toward them. "Marshall wants you all to come in," he announced. "It's secure. Porter's men are either dead or fled." "And Porter himself?" Harrison asked. "Not here. Place looks like it was abandoned in a hurry." Miller turned to Becca. "But we found something you should see." Heart in her throat, Becca followed Miller toward the cabin, Harrison and Cole close behind. As they approached, she could see it was larger than she'd expected, a substantial structure with a wide porch and multiple rooms, more a hunting lodge than a simple cabin. Lanterns had been lit, casting warm light through the windows into the deepening gloom. Marshal Hollister met them on the porch, his expression grim. "2 of Porter's men dead. Decided to fight rather than surrender. The others must have left earlier today." "And Silas?" Becca asked, dreading the answer. "Not here, but there's evidence he was." Hollister led her inside to a small room at the rear of the cabin. It had clearly been used as a makeshift prison. A chair with cut ropes still attached to its arms and legs stood in the center, surrounded by discarded cigarette butts and dried blood stains on the rough wooden floor. On a small table nearby lay a folded piece of paper addressed in an elegant hand, "For Miss Rebecca Morgan." "Found that when we searched the place," Hollister explained. "Hasn't been opened." With trembling fingers, Becca unfolded the paper. The message inside, written in the same elegant script, was brief but chilling. "Miss Morgan, by the time you read this, I will have departed this tedious territory for more civilized environs." Winters provided most entertaining company during his brief stay, but alas, business necessitated our premature separation. If you wish to see him alive again, bring the notebook to the abandoned mine at Black Rock Canyon by midnight tomorrow. Come alone. Any deviation from these instructions will result in his immediate execution. Regards, Colonel Harland Porter. Becca read the note aloud, her voice steady despite the fear clutching at her heart. "It's a trap," Ezra declared immediately, having joined them silently. "Of course it is," Hollister agreed. "Porter knows the notebook is already in official hands. He can't possibly expect you to retrieve it and bring it to him." "Then why the note?" Cole asked. "To draw her out," Ezra said grimly. Porter knows she's the key witness against him. With both her and Winters eliminated, the case weakens significantly. But Silas is alive, Becca pointed out, clinging to that one crucial fact. At least he was when this note was written. Maybe, Hollister cautioned, or Porter's just using him as bait, regardless of his actual condition. Becca studied the note again, her perfect memory analyzing every detail, the quality of the paper, the confident penmanship, the calculated cruelty of the wording. This was a man accustomed to power, to being obeyed without question. A man who saw people as either assets or liabilities. We need to search the rest of the cabin, she decided. Porter might have left other clues about where they've taken Silas. They split up methodically, examining every room of the substantial structure. It had clearly been Porter's private retreat. The furnishings were expensive, the liquor cabinet stocked with fine whiskeys, the kitchen equipped for elaborate meals. A stark contrast to Silas's simple cabin in the hills. In what appeared to be Porter's office, Becca found a map of the territory pinned to the wall, with several locations marked in red ink. One of those marks corresponded to the abandoned mine mentioned in Porter's note, Black Rock Canyon, about 15 miles northwest of their current location. "Marshall," she called, "I think I've found something." Hollister joined her, studying the map with professional interest. Black Rock was a silver mine played out 5 or 6 years ago. Remote, isolated, easy to defend. He turned to Becca. Perfect place for an ambush. Or for holding a prisoner, she countered. We have to check it out. We will, Hollister assured her. But carefully. If Porter's there with his remaining men, they'll be expecting us. Not tonight, they won't. Becca argued, a plan forming in her mind. The note gives me until midnight tomorrow. They'll be expecting me to take time to consider, perhaps, to try to retrieve the notebook. If we move now, we might catch them off guard. The marshal considered this, then nodded slowly. Could work, but it'll be a hard ride in the dark. I know these hills better than most, Ezra offered. Can get us there by midnight if we leave now. Hollister made his decision. Miller, you and Harrison ride back to Rapid City. Inform Judge Harmon of what we've found and where we're headed. The rest of us will continue to Black Rock Canyon. As they prepared to ride out, Becca found herself drawn back to the room where Silas had been held. The cut ropes, the bloodstains, evidence of his suffering, of his continued resistance. He hadn't given up. Neither would she. She knelt, touching one of the dried blood drops on the floor. Hold on, Silas, she whispered. We're coming. The ride to Black Rock Canyon was arduous, following narrow trails that wound through increasingly rugged terrain. The moon, just past full, provided enough light for them to maintain a steady pace, but the shadows played tricks on weary eyes, transforming innocent rocks and trees into lurking assailants. Ezra led the way, his knowledge of the back country proving invaluable once again. Despite his age, he showed remarkable stamina, never faltering as he guided them through the darkness. Used to be silver in these hills, he told Becca, as they paused briefly to rest the horses. Black Rock was one of the first big strikes after Deadwood. Played out fast, though. Too much water in the lower levels, flooded back in '71. How big is the mine? Hollister asked, joining them. Main shaft goes about 500 feet into the mountain. Couple of side tunnels. One big chamber where they found the main vein. Ezra's face was grim in the moonlight. Plenty of places to hide, or to set a trap. The marshal nodded thoughtfully. We'll approach from above if possible. Try to get a look at what we're facing before we commit. They continued on the terrain, growing steeper and more broken as they neared the canyon. Finally, Ezra signaled a halt, pointing to a dark opening in the cliffside ahead, the entrance to the abandoned mine, barely visible in the moonlight. No lights, he observed. Either they're deep inside or they're not here at all. Or they're waiting in the dark, Hollister added. We'll circle around approach from above as planned. It took another hour of careful climbing to reach a vantage point overlooking the mine entrance. From this height, they could see the entire clearing before the mine empty, except for a single wagon and 3 horses tethered to a makeshift hitching post. 3 men at most, Hollister calculated, unless there are more inside without mounts. Porter would have at least 4 or 5 with him, Ezra reasoned. This might just be an advance party setting up for tomorrow. Becca studied the scene below her perfect memory, comparing what she saw with the maps and notes in Porter's cabin. Something didn't fit. The wagon was old-weathered, not the type of conveyance a man of Porter's standing would use. And why so few horses for a man known to travel with multiple guards? I don't think Porter's down there, she said slowly. This doesn't match his usual patterns. Hollister considered this. Could be deliberate, making it look like a smaller force than it is. Or it could be a different group entirely, Ezra suggested. Prospectors looking to try their luck in an abandoned mine. Only one way to find out, the marshal decided. We'll approach quietly, try to get a look inside before we reveal ourselves. They descended carefully, leaving their horses secured out of sight. As they neared the mine entrance, Hollister signaled for them to spread out, covering all possible exits. Becca found herself paired with Ezra, approaching from the eastern side where a small stream cut through the canyon floor. The clearing before the mine was unnervingly quiet. No voices, no movement around the wagon or horses. The animals themselves seemed unnaturally still, not even shifting or nickering as the newcomers approached. Something ain't right, Ezra murmured, his rifle raised and ready. Becca nodded, her own borrowed revolver clutched tightly. The silence was too complete, the scene too static. It reminded her of something, a memory tugging at the edges of her consciousness. It's a setup, she realized suddenly. Those aren't real horses. Even as the words left her mouth, a muzzle flash erupted from the darkness of the mine entrance. The report of the rifle cracked across the canyon as Ezra shoved her roughly behind the cover of a large boulder. More shots followed, bullets whining off stone and kicking up dirt around them. "Marshal!" Ezra shouted. "Ambush!" Hollister and the others were already returning fire from their positions around the clearing. The muzzle flashes from inside the mine revealed at least 4 gunmen well protected within the entrance. "We need to flank them," Hollister called from somewhere to their right. "Cole, work your way around to the west. Johnson, can you and Miss Morgan cover us from here?" "Got you covered," Ezra confirmed, sighting down his rifle at the mine entrance. "Stay low, Becca." For several tense minutes, the gunfight continued, a deadly exchange of fire between the lawmen spread around the clearing and the unknown assailants within the mine. The night air grew thick with powder smoke, the flashes of gunfire momentarily blinding in the darkness, the sound of bullets striking stone, a constant reminder of how thin the line between life and death had become. Becca, following Ezra's instructions, reloaded his rifle while he fired, her hands steady despite the chaos around them. All her senses seemed heightened by danger, the acrid smell of gunpowder, the metallic taste of fear, the weight of the bullets in her palm. Then something unexpected happened. New shots rang out from inside the mine, but these were directed inward, not out toward the clearing. Shouts and curses echoed from the dark opening, followed by an eerie silence. "Hold fire," Hollister ordered. "Something's happening in there." They waited, tense and ready. Then a voice called from the mine entrance, weak but unmistakable. "Marshal, that you out there?" Becca's heart leaped. "Silas!" Before anyone could stop her, she was running toward the mine, heedless of the potential danger. Hollister cursed and followed, his revolver still raised and ready. Silas Winters stood swaying in the entrance, one arm pressed to his side, where a dark stain spread across his shirt. His face was bruised, one eye swollen nearly shut, but his other eye blazed with fierce determination. Behind him, 4 men lay on the ground. Porter's men, now either dead or incapacitated. "Told you I'd meet you at Hollister's," he managed, attempting a smile that turned into a grimace of pain. "Got a little delayed." Becca reached him just as his legs gave out, supporting him as he slumped against her. The smell of blood, sweat, and gunpowder enveloped her as his weight threatened to drag them both to the ground. "You're hurt," she said unnecessarily, feeling the warmth of his blood seeping through her own clothes. "Been better," he admitted, his voice rasping with pain and thirst. "Been worse, too." Hollister joined them quickly, assessing the situation inside the mine. "Porter's men." Silas nodded weakly. "Left me here as bait. We're supposed to wait for Becca tomorrow, but got impatient when they heard you coming." A ghost of his old smile flickered across his battered face. "They didn't search me proper. Had a derringer in my boot." "But you took out 4 armed men with a derringer?" Hollister asked incredulously. "Just one." Silas's breathing was labored, each word an effort. "Created enough confusion for the others to start shooting each other in the dark. Porter taught 'em to be trigger-happy, not smart." "Where is Porter?" Hollister pressed, even as he helped ease Silas to a sitting position against the mine wall. "Gone. Left for the territorial border hours ago. Montana, he said. Has connections in Helena." Silas winced as the movement pulled at his wounds. "Told me all about it. Didn't much care if I knew his plans, seeing as he didn't expect me to live to tell anyone." "We know," Becca assured him, kneeling beside him and pressing a cloth against the worst of his wounds. "Judge Harmon has issued warrants. There's a posse heading to Deadwood right now to arrest Caldwell and the others." "The notebook," Silas said urgently, gripping her arm with surprising strength given his condition. "Did you—" "It's safe," she promised. "In the judge's hands. All the evidence, all the names. Porter can't escape justice now." Relief washed over his features, and he sagged more heavily against the mine wall. "Good. That's good. We need to get him to a doctor," Becca told Hollister, alarmed by the amount of blood soaking through the makeshift bandage. "He's losing too much blood." The marshal nodded grimly. "Nearest doctor's back in Rapid City. It's a long ride." "There's a trapper's cabin about 3 miles east of here," Ezra offered, joining them. "Fellow named Harkins. Has some medical knowledge. Patched me up once after a bear got too friendly with my backside." "Can Winters make it 3 miles?" Hollister asked doubtfully, taking in Silas's ashen face and blood-stained clothing. "I'll make it," Silas asserted, though the effort of speaking made him cough painfully. "We'll get him there," Becca declared, her voice leaving no room for argument. The journey to Harkins's cabin was a blur of anxiety and determination. Cole and Hollister supported Silas between them, while Becca rode alongside, one hand always on his arm, as if physical contact alone could keep him tethered to life. Twice he nearly fell from the saddle, consciousness slipping away as blood loss and exhaustion took their toll. The trapper, a grizzled man with a face like tanned leather, welcomed them without question, immediately clearing his table to serve as an operating surface. His cabin was small but spotlessly clean, the walls lined with dried herbs and medical supplies that spoke of a man prepared for the harsh realities of wilderness life. "Bullet wound?" he asked, examining Silas's side once they'd laid him on the table. "Knife," Silas corrected weakly. "Porter's parting gift." Harkins nodded grimly. "Deep, but looks like it missed anything vital. Going to need stitching, though." He turned to Becca. "You his woman?" "I'm his friend," she replied, the inadequacy of the word striking her even as she spoke it. Harkins assessed her with shrewd eyes that missed nothing. Then you'll help me. Need someone with steady hands. He began gathering supplies, needle thread, alcohol, clean bandages. Rest of you can wait outside. Going to get crowded in here. The next hour was a blur of blood and focused intensity as Becca assisted Harkins in cleaning and stitching Silas's wound. She worked mechanically following the trapper's instructions, precisely forcing herself to ignore that it was Silas's flesh beneath her fingers, Silas's blood staining her hands. Only by distancing herself from the emotional reality could she maintain the calm precision the task required. Throughout the procedure, Silas remained conscious, his jaw clenched against the pain, his eyes fixed on Becca's face, as if drawing strength from her presence. Only once did he make a sound, a sharp intake of breath, when Harkins probed particularly deep for fragments of his torn shirt. "Almost done," Harkins announced, finally tying off the last stitch with practiced fingers. "He's lucky. Blade went between the ribs, missed the lung by a hair's breadth. Few weeks rest. He'll be good as new." "Few days," Silas corrected, his voice stronger than it had been since they found him. Harkins snorted a sound somewhere between amusement and disgust. "Stubborn fool. Just like all you mountain men. Think you're made of iron instead of flesh and blood." But there was respect in the old trapper's eyes as he began bandaging the wound. Once Silas was cleaned, bandaged, and moved to Harkins's bed, the others were allowed back inside. Marshal Hollister immediately began questioning him about his captivity and Porter's plans. "Took me to his cabin first." Silas recounted, his voice tired but clear. "Wanted to know who else knew about the notebook, what evidence we had against him." He paused, eyes meeting Becca's briefly. "Tried to persuade me to tell him." The understatement hung in the air, belied by the fresh bruises visible on his face and chest. "Did he say anything about his plans beyond Montana?" Hollister pressed. "Mining interests in Helena. Has a partner there, name of Whitfield." Silas winced as he shifted position. "Said something about San Francisco after that, if need be. Man's got money stashed all over the territories." The marshal nodded thoughtfully. "I'll wire the authorities in Montana and California, and the federal marshals. Porter won't find it easy to start over with every lawman in the West looking for him." "What about Caldwell and the others?" Becca asked. "If Judge Harmon's posse reached Deadwood as planned, they should be in custody by now." Hollister's expression was grimly satisfied. "The trafficking operation is finished one way or another." As night deepened, arrangements were made for their stay. Harkins offered his cabin to Silas and Becca, insisting he would be comfortable enough in his storehouse. Hollister and the others would make camp outside, taking turns standing watch in case any of Porter's men were still in the area. Left alone with Silas, Becca found herself suddenly awkward, unsure what to say now that the immediate crisis had passed. She busied herself preparing a broth from supplies Harkins had provided, avoiding the intensity of Silas's gaze. "You risked a lot coming after me," he said, finally breaking the silence. "Could have stayed safe in Rapid City." "Like you risked everything leading Porter's men away from me," she countered, bringing the broth to his bedside. "We're well matched in foolhardy courage, it seems." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Seems so." As she helped him sit up to drink the broth, their eyes met, and the unspoken current that had been building between them since that first day outside the Golden Spike surged to the surface. "I thought I'd lost you," Becca admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "When we found the blood in Porter's cabin, I thought, takes more than Porter and his dogs to finish me." Silas interrupted, though his expression softened at her distress. "Too stubborn to die, according to Hannah." The mention of his wife's name hung between them, a reminder of all that had shaped him, all that had brought them to this moment. But instead of creating distance, it felt like an acknowledgement, a bridge between past and present. "She was right," Becca said simply, "and I'm grateful for that stubbornness." Silas's hand found hers, calloused fingers wrapping around her smaller ones with gentle pressure. "The notebook. You're sure it's safe?" "Yes, Judge Harmon has it. He's issued warrants for Porter Caldwell and everyone named in it." Becca's voice strengthened with conviction. "It's over, Silas. They won't hurt anyone else." Relief washed over his features, the tension he'd carried for 5 long years finally beginning to ease. "Catherine will have justice, and Hannah, and Lily." "Yes," Becca affirmed, "and all the others. The ones in the woods, the ones sold to mining camps and brothels. All of them." Silas nodded, his eyes drifting closed as exhaustion finally claimed him. But his hand remained wrapped around hers, a connection neither seemed willing to break. Becca sat beside him as he slept, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest, the peaceful expression that had replaced the vigilant wariness she'd grown accustomed to. In sleep, the years seemed to fall away from him, revealing glimpses of the man he might have been without the burden of grief and vengeance. Outside, the night deepened toward dawn, stars wheeling overhead in their ancient patterns. The world continued its turning, indifferent to the small dramas of human lives. But in that quiet cabin, something had shifted, a cycle of violence and retribution, giving way to the possibility of healing, of beginning anew. 3 days later, they returned to Rapid City. Silas, though still weak, insisted on riding his own horse rather than being transported in a wagon. His stubborn independence drew grudging admiration from Harkins and exasperated concern from Becca, but in the end, they compromised. He would ride, but they would travel slowly with frequent rest stops. The news that greeted them in Rapid City confirmed that justice was finally in motion. Judge Harmon's posse had successfully arrested Victor Caldwell and several other members of Porter's operation in Deadwood. The evidence from the notebook, combined with testimonies from women freed from the Golden Spike, had provided overwhelming proof of their crimes. But Porter himself remained at large. Despite wires to authorities throughout the territories, there had been no confirmed sightings. He had vanished like smoke, taking his wealth and connections with him. "He won't get far," Judge Harmon assured them during a meeting in Marshal Hollister's office. "Every federal marshal from here to the Pacific is looking for him, and the notebook contains enough detail about his financial holdings that we've been able to freeze most of his assets." "Most, but not all," Silas observed grimly. "Porter's too smart to keep everything where it can be found." "Perhaps," the judge conceded, "but he's lost his power base, his protection, his empire. Even if he escapes immediate justice, he's a fugitive now, not a respected businessman." Becca found this cold comfort. The man who had ordered her mother's death, who had orphaned her at 10 years old, was still free, still potentially dangerous. The same man who had murdered Hannah and Lily Winters, who had left Silas bleeding in an abandoned mine. As if reading her thoughts, Ezra spoke up from his position by the window. "Man like Porter used to power, he won't stay hidden long. Pride won't let him. He'll try to rebuild somewhere, and when he does, we'll be waiting," Hollister finished. The conversation turned to more immediate matters, preparations for the trials of Caldwell and the others' arrangements for the women rescued from the Golden Spike testimony that would be required from both Silas and Becca. "What happens after the trial?" Silas asked the question, directed at no one in particular. The judge smiled slightly. "That's entirely up to you, Mr. Winters. Your 5-year quest is effectively complete. The trafficking operation has been dismantled. The guilty are facing justice. What do you plan to do with your freedom? It was a question Silas clearly hadn't considered. For 5 years, his entire existence had been defined by his pursuit of Porter, his search for evidence, his solitary mission of vengeance. Now, with that purpose fulfilled, or nearly so, what remained? "Haven't thought that far ahead," he admitted. "Well, perhaps you should," the judge suggested. "The territorial governor has expressed interest in your services should you be inclined toward law enforcement again. Your experience would be valuable." Silas's expression revealed nothing, but Becca, watching him closely, saw the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Return to the profession that had cost him his family, resume the life he'd abandoned 5 years ago, or retreat once more to his solitary cabin in the hills. "I'll consider it," was all he said. Later, as they walked together along Rapid City's main street, Becca broached the subject again. "Would you do it? Go back to being a lawman?" Silas was silent for several paces. "Don't know. Been alone a long time. Not sure I remember how to be around people anymore." "You've been around me," Becca pointed out. "That seems to have worked out reasonably well." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You're different." "How so?" He struggled to find the words unused to articulating such personal thoughts. "You understand. About loss. About needing to know the truth no matter how painful. Most folks don't." Becca nodded, accepting this assessment. They did share a unique bond forged in similar suffering, similar quests for answers. But was that enough to build a future on? "What about you?" Silas asked, turning the question back on her. "What will you do now?" It was Becca's turn to hesitate. The question had occupied her thoughts increasingly as the immediate danger receded. Her father and brother were implicated in Porter's operation, though to what extent remained unclear. Her home in Deadwood was no longer an option, and the idea of returning to the life of a farmer's daughter after all she had experienced seemed impossible. "I don't know," she admitted. "I have no family left, no home to return to." "You have options," Silas assured her. "With your memory, your intelligence, you could do anything. Study law, perhaps, or medicine." "Those aren't exactly common paths for women," Becca observed wryly. "You're not a common woman." The simple statement, delivered without flattery or condescension, warmed her more than elaborate compliments might have. Silas saw her clearly, her strengths, her capabilities, her worth as a person, rather than as property or decoration. They had reached the small house Marshal Hollister had arranged for Silas's use during his recovery and the preparations for the trial. It was modest, but comfortable, a significant improvement over the primitive cabin in the hills. "Will you come in?" Silas asked, hesitating at the door. "There's something I want to show you." Inside, he retrieved a small wooden box from beside his bed. It was beautifully crafted, the wood polished to a soft glow, the joints fitted with precision. Clearly, the work of a skilled carpenter. "Made this years ago," Silas explained, opening the lid. "After Hannah and Lily, after I lost them. Meant it to hold mementos." Inside lay a few precious items: a child's hair ribbon, a woman's silver thimble, a small sketch of Hannah and Lily that Becca recognized from the letters she'd seen in his cabin. But there was also something new. A blue hair ribbon that Becca recognized as her own lost during their flight from Deadwood. "Found this at Porter's cabin," Silas said, lifting the ribbon carefully. "They'd taken it from my saddlebag. Thought it was gone for good." Becca stared at the simple strip of fabric, confused by its significance. "Why did you keep it?" "Reminded me of you," Silas said simply. "Your courage, your determination. Kept it to remember in case—" He trailed off, but the implication was clear: in case she hadn't survived, in case he'd failed to protect her, as he'd failed to protect his family. The gesture touched her deeply. This solitary wounded man had carried a piece of her with him, had treasured it as he treasured the memories of his wife and child. Not as a replacement for them, but as a continuation of what they represented. Love connection, the best parts of humanity worth fighting to preserve. "I thought I'd lost everything when my mother disappeared," Becca said softly. "My home, my sense of safety, my place in the world. For 13 years, I've been drifting, never belonging anywhere." She met his gaze directly. "Until I came to your cabin." Silas looked away, uncomfortable with the emotion in her voice. "Was just a shelter from the storm." "It was more than that," Becca insisted. "It was the first place since St. Louis where I felt seen, where my mind wasn't something to hide or apologize for, where I could be fully myself." He seemed at a loss for words, unaccustomed to such direct emotional declarations. But his hand reached for hers, calloused fingers entwining with her smaller ones in a gesture that spoke volumes. "Cabin's still there," he said finally. "Needs work. That west wall was never quite right." It wasn't a declaration of love or a proposal of marriage. It was something more measured, more honest, an acknowledgement of possibility, an open door rather than a binding commitment. And for Becca, raised in a world where women were traded like property, where their value was determined by men's assessments, it was perfect in its respect for her agency, her right to choose her own path. "I've always wanted to learn more about carpentry," she replied, a smile tugging at her lips. "And I think I'd be quite good at hunting with more practice." "No doubt," Silas agreed, the ghost of an answering smile crossing his features. "You're a quick study." Outside the window, Ezra Johnson rode past, pausing to tip his hat to them before continuing down the street. The old man had declined Judge Harmon's offer of a reward for his part in bringing down Porter's operation. "Just did what needed doing," he'd said. But he had accepted a position as a guide for the federal marshals still searching for Porter in the hills. His quest for justice, like theirs, continued. For Silas and Becca, the future remained unwritten. Porter was still at large, a danger that might one day resurface. The wounds of the past, the losses of Catherine of Hannah and Lily of Innocence itself would never fully heal. But as they stood together in the quiet room, hands linked in simple understanding, something new had begun to take root. Not a replacement for what was lost, but a continuation. Not an erasure of the past, but a building upon its foundation. A recognition that while freedom often comes at a terrible price, its value is beyond measure, especially when shared with someone who understands its cost. In the Black Hills, Silas's cabin stood empty, but waiting a shelter built by hands that knew both violence and tenderness. In time, perhaps it would become more than a solitary man's refuge. Perhaps it would become a home, a place not just to hide from the world, but to begin anew within it. The value of freedom, they had both learned, lay not just in the absence of chains, but in the presence of choice. And for the first time in both their lives, the future held choices worth making, paths worth exploring together.